1997 was a blast, but was 1998 great too? Well, it was a pretty darn good year. I mean, see for yourself. Caesar 3 is a third title in ancient Rome-themed series of city-building games, in which you must assume a role of no other than the governor of one of the provinces. As you go through the game, you'll be constructing cities of increasing size and complexity. So, with each next mission in the campaign, you'll have to build larger cities and complete series of different victory conditions, either peaceful or military. Peaceful ones pose a risk of earthquakes, fires and other natural hazards to your future metropolis, while the military can also challenge you with enemy invasions. The game is played on an isometric top-down view map and require you to erect buildings to please and fulfill your citizens' requests and requirements. Other than that, you'll need to manage several interconnected supply chains, ensuring cities' continuous growth, all the while making sure all the basic needs of food, water, religious services, entertainment, education and health services are met. Progress in Caesar 3 is evaluated against the population of a city and 4 stats of culture, prosperity, peace and favor. First is measured based on the number and coverage of the cultural buildings in the city, so temples, theaters and schools among others. Prosperity circles around employment rates, housing, quality and revenue. Peace is measured based on the damage caused by crime, riots and invasions. And finally, favor is based on how fast you complete requests sent to you by Caesar himself, and usually mean paying a tribute or sending him gifts. You know, how you would in these trying times. If at any given moment while playing you'll feel lost and confused like a child in the middle of a huge shopping center with no parents around, there are a series of advisors in the game who will help you with various aspects of the city life, and a chief advisor too, who summarizes critical issues and key informations of happenings in your city. In essence, everything in Caesar 3 is based on underlying systems and your citizens. So, each and every building requires someone to work in it, and then in turn, when he/she does, it usually requires other types of people to either distribute the produce or use it. In that aspect, Caesar 3 is more like Settlers than most other city building games. To summarize, Caesar 3 is a brilliant little game and it's as fun today as it was when it released. Also, not that little, no idea why I said that. Despite the title's similarities, Gran Touring doesn't have much to do with Gran Turismo. It's an unlicensed circuit racing game featuring over 20 trucks and cars. So a pretty decent selection if I say so myself. It's a weird saying, you know? I often wondered why would anyone else say that they're saying something themselves. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? But who am I to question this? I know nothing of the history and genesis of sayings and are only semi-good talking about video games. Anyway, Gran Touring features 2 game modes. Arcade, which consists of single and checkpoint races, first being exactly what it sounds like, and second is driving checkpoint to checkpoint before the time runs out. You know, like you did in Outrun years earlier. The second game mode is so-called Simulator, and it's split into 3 sub-modes. Don't you just love overcomplicated menus? Championship, the main part of the game in which you practice and race on various tracks, all the while working to upgrade and keep your car repaired in tip-top shape to win races and climb the world rankings. The second one is Auto Test mode, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You jump in a car and can test it out on an obstacle course. Finally, multiplayer, which is, well, I mean, do I really have to explain? I don't think so. And up to 7 of you can race each other across LAN or serial connection. No split screen or internet racing though. The tracks, while based on the international Grand Prix ones, are unlicensed, so can't work under their original names and can be raced both in regular and mirror direction. There are also 12 different drivers, each with their own unique AI and driving behavior, and learning how they act during races will be a huge help in your career. Though it has to be said here that Gran Touring is not really a difficult game, so don't expect to be overly challenged like ever. Different weather conditions and time of the day are also included in the game, but I never noticed them making any real difference in driving. In fact, despite what it may seem, Gran Touring is much closer to arcade races like Daytona USA than simulations like the aforementioned Gran Turismo. Presentation-wise, the game is rather nice looking and sounding, and even if it was a budget release, it definitely didn't look like it. Biofreaks, or Biological Flying Robotic Enhanced Armored Killing Synthoids, a stupid-ass name I must add, is a rather brutal and blood-by-the-bucket spilling 3D one-on-one versus fighter. And it's that brutality of attacks and also dangers in the interactive arenas filled with traps, chainsaws and lava pits and the likes what's most memorable and notable about it. But before we get into details, there is a story here. Yep, you guessed it, it's not great. But since it's a versus fighter, it doesn't have to be. So, in the far-off future, the America has fallen. Not to any other nation, external power or aliens, but under the rule of 9 mega corporations that strive for control and profit, effectively eliminating any real power that the government might have had in the past. To limit the profit losses caused by potential conflicts, violence and crime between them, they agreed to solve all their disputes in the deadly arenas using specially trained and bioengineered fighters. And these are broken down into three kinds of warriors, so-called synthoids that have no mechanical parts and were entirely bioengineered for combat, retros with weapons attached to their bodies, and finally dozers, which are entirely mechanical with an exception of their brains encased within the rock-hard shells of the bodies. Each of the characters have their own unique close and long-range weapons and a jetpack. Well, shield too that protects from long-range attacks, but it's limited use, so it's always better to dodge than take those shots in. If possible, that is. So, being very brutal, with chopped off limbs and decapitations being nothing particularly special about each fight, and having a decent cast of characters and arenas, had to make Biofreaks an instant hit, right? Well, it wasn't one of the most popular games in 1998, that's for sure. Blood and violence aside, Biofreaks feels simplistic and banal as compared to giants of the genre like Virtua Fighter or Tekken. A lot of action happens from afar, with players shooting at each other, there's no combos, no reveals and even no throws in the game. And controls, for the lack of a better word, feel stiff and floaty at the same time. I never enjoyed Biofreaks, but it doesn't mean that the others didn't. That said, I don't recall talking to anyone who would have played it, so it's highly probable that many people didn't even try it out. If you like versus fighters, there's definitely something in the game worth experiencing, especially if you're gonna test it out with someone else, but if you like me and only ever play this occasionally, then there's a lot much better games in the genre out there. DX Ball 2 is based on DX Ball 1, which in turn was based on Amiga's Mega Ball that was inspired by Breakout and Arkanoid. Oof, what a legacy. All these games were, nay, are amazing, and the idea behind gameplay is nearly as old as the gaming itself. So, each level is static and non-scrolling, with the paddle firmly placed at the bottom, only moving horizontally across the screen, and colorful bricks on top arranged in various intricate patterns. The paddle is used to bounce the ball that destroys the bricks above it. Some of them take more than one hit to break, some are indestructible or invisible, and there are even these that are combustible. Destroyed bricks sometimes drop random power-ups that, when picked up, grant various game-changing bonuses, like enlargement or reduction of paddle size, fireball, multi-ball, paddle-mounted cannons, and others. When the screen is cleared and there's no more bricks left, you move to the next stage. But if the ball ever leaves the screen, passing through its bottom edge, you lose a life. Full version of the game was a huge step up from its predecessor, offering a considerable bump in presentation, with high-resolution fully textured bricks and backgrounds, high-quality special effects, well, at least for the time, real-time ray-traced balls, and a whopping 150 levels divided into 6 uniquely themed and designed board sets. Demo version only offered 24 of these, which may not seem like a lot in comparison, but in the same time, it's plenty enough to familiarize yourself with it and decide if it was something you'd like to pull the trigger on. DX Ball was the best Breakout/Arkanoid type of a game on Windows, until the release of DX Ball 2, which took the cake and is one of the best games in the genre to this very day. If the video and what I'm saying don't convince you, give it a go, it's not only worth it but also extremely addictive. The best way to experience DX Ball today is a semi-recent Steam re-release in the form of 20th Anniversary Edition. Especially that it had been facelifted a bit more, converted to work great on modern widescreen displays, and has additional level packs available for purchase too. Damage Incorporated is a Macintosh FPS based on the aging Marathon engine and ported to PC in 1998. You could say that Damage Incorporated was a protoplast of later and much better Rainbow Six games. So, you being the super turbo extra cool and skilled leader of the US anti-terrorist unit are tasked with leading four-man teams around different missions, neutralizing number of various paramilitary groups. So, despite the title, you don't play Damage Incorporated like any other shooter, just running in, guns blazing against an overwhelming enemy forces, downing them left and right with no effort as if they were flies. But actually have to plan out your approach and how your teammates will move and react, cause if you don't, you'll fail. Simple as that. Well, you won't cause you're you, but anyone else would. All that makes the game feel a bit more complex and strategic than any other run-of-the-mill shooter. Sadly, your teammates don't always follow your orders to the letter, which supposedly was a known issue. And while it's a bit troublesome, it also could be argued that it's more realistic too, simulating random on-the-spot behavior that the person is prone to if taken out of their comfort zone. So, under an unexpected fire or surrounded, when something happens you didn't expect or wasn't prepared for. The aforementioned Rainbow Six implemented team control much better, and their AI is in a league above the one in Damage Incorporated too. But that's something we'll discuss in detail when we get to it later on in the year. Cause yeah, Rainbow Six released in 1998 on Windows 2. All that said, Damage Incorporated is not a bad game, just a tad more chaotic than you'd expect from a squad-based tactical shooter, and not exceptional in anything it does. The graphics, while not very good, are also not off-putting, and the weapons and team members' banter are both fun and add flavor to this unusual shooter. If you like FPSs, there's no reason to skip it, but if you're not a fan, it's not a game that would sway you to change your mind about the genre. After incredible success and popularity of Warcraft 2, in 1998 Blizzard released Starcraft, a real-time strategy that, as we know now, crushed Warcraft with its popularity, became the title beloved world over, and was one of the cornerstones that sparked creation of the esports. In that all, whether you like RTSs or like me don't, it's without a shred of a doubt one of the most important titles in history of gaming. Both Starcraft and its expansion in the form of Brood War came out in 1998, so I will cover both of them at once, because why the hell not? Anyway, the games are set in 26th century in space and cover the struggle for dominance between the four species. The adaptable and mobile Terrans, so us, the ever-evolving insectoid Zerg, which are responsible for coining of the term of Zerging, based on one of the tactics used by competitive Starcraft players, the powerful Protoss, and finally Xel Naga, a so-called creator race that eons earlier genetically engineered and created both Zerg and Protoss. The story of both games is so complicated, and I shit you not here, that recalling it here in detail would be troublesome and require much more time than I am willing to give any particular title in this video. So it's best to watch it in the in-game cinematics and experience while playing. But to summarize it, the game starts days after the first Zerg attack on the human colonies and the consequential annihilation of said colony by Protoss, who wanted to cleanse it of infected by Zerg humans, taking no risk in leaving anyone alive behind. All that sparked fears and turbulence among Terrans, which led to political turmoil and eventually power shift within the faction. That's how the game begins. And if that sounds like it's full of plot holes and it's rather unclear, then like I said, you gotta see it to learn it. Anyway, for the most part, Starcraft and Brood War are your typical combat-centric RTSs. So while you still have the credits and power source to build units and erect buildings, the focus definitely is placed on combat and using all beautifully balanced nations against each other. Each of the races have their strong and weak points, but to simplify, it could be brought down to Zerg being the quickest to build, Terrans the cheapest and Protoss the most powerful. And Xel Naga, if you wonder, are not playable and only ever present in the background story parts of the game. If you're a fan of RTSs, then you know of Starcraft already and didn't need me to tell you about it at all. If you're not, then this may be the game to spark your interest, as it's truly outstanding and exceptional. While Biofreak was not great, Last Bronx is actually pretty darn good, even if not exceptional. It's Sega's own port of their arcade title, and as such it shared a lot with their Virtua Fighter series of games, in terms of tech and gameplay formula that is. So it's a full 3D versus fighter, pitting 9 different and unique fighters against each other in the most important fight of their lives. What a cliffhanger! But what is it all about? Cause I can't leave you like that with no details about it. Well, despite the title, Last Bronx does not take place in New York, but is in fact set in post-Japanese bubble alternate version of Tokyo, where disillusioned and out-of-work youth, not seeing their future in bright colors and having no support system or securities from the government, resort to joining crime families. After ceasefire between the gangs was broken by an unforeseen killing of a leader of one of the families, however, a mysterious group sent a message to all of them, demanding a fair tournament between the leaders of all families to decide which will be the one to rule over the others, and effectively become the one controlling all of Tokyo. The message leaves no space for interpretation, and the presence in the tournament is mandatory. And hence, the Last Bronx, so the second All Tokyo Street War tournament begins. Silly name, but a decent game. Fights takes place in locations all around Tokyo, and all 9 fighters are unique not only in how they look, but also their genesis, weapons that they use and fighting styles, making for a very fun and enjoyable romp. Especially if you're playing against someone else and not the CPU. Unlike Virtua Fighter 2, Last Bronx allows for use of taunts, and combinations of punch, kick and block buttons with directional controls are used for special attacks, throws and rolls. While Last Bronx on PC was nearly arcade perfect and much better than Saturn's original port, unlike its earlier brethren of Virtua Fighter 2, it did not support direct 3D and 3D acceleration cards, which means that huge chunk of potential player base was alienated by that design choice, not having powerful enough systems to run it fluidly. As entirely running software, Last Bronx required a hella capable CPU, and even high-end ones of the time couldn't always guarantee a constant 60 FPS gameplay. Arguably, the game's best played today, as its earlier requirements are largely a joke now, and even the potatoest of potatoes could run it at full speed in 2024. Dune 2000 is a partial reimagination of Westwood's earlier classic Dune 2, enhanced to run on modern at the time Windows systems and based on Frank Herbert's famous book Dune. The game is set on a titular planet and depicts a conflict between three large opposing royal houses of the Artrids, Ordos and Harkonnen. They compete for control and extraction of spice melange, a very rare and incredibly important in interstellar travel resource that is only found on the planet Dune. The spice is sold for the in-game currency of Solaris, which then in turn is used to erect buildings and purchase units. One of the changes to the original RTS is that you can finally control more than one unit at the time, a pet peeve of mine which made me despise the original title. Additionally, buildings set on concrete foundations do not deteriorate in Dune 2000, which perhaps was not a necessary change, but a very welcome one indeed. While all three houses differ in their in-lore genesis, most of the units that they have are identical. Some, however, like the Artrids Sonic Tanks, Ordos Deviators, and Harkonnen Devastators among others, are uniquely looking and operating ones, only available to their governing families. That said, capturing as opposed to destroying of competing houses' buildings that produces specialized units allows you a control of it too, so that if required, can too be a part of your winning strategy. While arguably Dune 2000 is the best version of Dune 2 to play, it is also a rather disappointing release, as other than the few small quality of life changes, it was not raised to the 1998's presentation standard and added very little to the by then rather basic and old original's gameplay formula. Upon its release, many better RTSs were on the market, even prior year alone spawned what felt like ungodly number of these, each next better than the previous. Dune 2000 is a good game, if you're looking for a 1992 experience. But if you want to play an interesting and creative game in a genre, by the time of its release, there were considerably more enticing choices everywhere. Oh, I've made some enemies with that sentence. While not really my cup of tea, coffee, coke or whiskey, Warbirds is definitely most unique title in one aspect out of all games in today's video. It's a World War II era fighters, bombers and dive bombers combat simulation taking place on mock and historically accurate battlefields and only ever playable online, meaning that it offered no single player campaign or even experience of any kind other than the duel practice. If you wanted to play it, you had to do it online against real life players. There were 4 factions in each game, red, green, gold and purple, and after picking one you were instantly dropped in the middle of it all. So you'll fly in one of 50 entirely different and real-life era appropriate planes against the other teams in all-out combat encounters. There's no posing, no running to the bathroom quick, and no dinner breaks. If you're in the air, you gotta be at the steering stick fighting for your side. One notable quality of Warbirds worth mentioning here is the realism. Not only each and every plane had their own stats of speed, weight and maneuverability, but they're as close to real life as possible, including effects like engine stall and high G maneuver readouts. I know that it's blackouts technically speaking, but if you ever had one in real life, they feel more rad, at least to me. Interestingly enough, the game was available entirely free for 5 hours of playtime, after which you had to cough up for either silver, gold or platinum subscription plans, giving you 5, 13 and 20 hours of gameplay included per month respectively, after which each additional hour would cost $2, a rather steep pricing today and even more so in 1998. Especially that Warbirds is one of those games that require 3 things for a player to succeed and become the air combat ace, and these are practice, practice, and you guessed it right, practice. That said, the experience was supposedly worth the price, as avid fans of the game would tell you. I have to take their word for it, as I've never played Warbirds. It was just not something I was into back then anymore, and definitely not in the subscription format. Incoming the final conflict was the bomb, and I loved it. It ran great on my TNT-2 M64-2, which was not something that could be said about most demanding AAA games. So it was definitely a treat and a title I genuinely enjoyed getting lost in. It took place in the dark future of 2009 when Earth was invaded by the alien forces. You know, I sometimes wondered why would aliens in pop culture and media always attack after finding us? I mean, hasn't Star Trek taught us that despite all, peaceful coexistence is and always will be, in the long run, more profitable choice? At least in terms of progress, quality of life and unhappiness. Sadly, all I ever could come up with was a theory that all aliens had to be future humans sharing the same faults we have ingrained in us from birth. So hunger for power and control of the riches, being monetary or in natural exploitable resources. And since they came to us, and we can barely reach the moon today in 2024, and done it last time in Minecraft over 50 years ago I believe, they clearly have a considerable technological advantage and want to put it to action as fast as possible, not giving us a chance to catch up. Makes sense. In War and Conquest after all, you want to use all your assets as optimally as possible, inducing minimal losses too. Anyway, cause I'm as usual lost in my crazy furies, not focusing on what I was supposed to talk about, in incoming, aliens are, well, incoming. They've already destroyed our moon base and the invasion of Earth is steadily progressing from the Arctic. So, you'll be tasked with defeating their offensive using various arsenal at our hands, so turrets, tanks, helicopters, jets, and in time even captured alien fighters, on battlefields all around the world. And as the story progresses, you'll even take the fight to the moon to recapture it. And yes, I know you will, cause you're you, so the biggest bump that there ever was, and bookcase example of a tough guy. A true and only unstoppable force of nature in our arsenal. The variety of vehicles and kinds of missions, coupled with simple but engaging story and most of all hella playable gameplay loop, ensured Incoming's popularity. And believe it or not, the non-stop action approach proves a timeless formula for success, and Incoming the final conflict is as fun today as it was in 1998. Airline Tycoon is a business simulation in which you manage your own airlines. It came from the 1990s king of the management and simulation games, so German developers, and it's a rather large and interesting title, despite the colorful humorous graphics. You are pitted against 3 other opponents and have to complete various different financial objectives split over numerous unique missions. And since there's 48 different airports and practically unlimited number of planes out of 18 models that can be flying at any moment in the game, you're gonna have your hands full and a lot to do. Naturally, you're responsible for everything required in running of the airport. So you'll hire and fire staff, take commissions, buy, repair and retrofit your airplanes, equip them to suit your customers' needs. And that's not even all, we're just scratching the surface. You'll attend various meetings, plan flight routes, buy fuel and... well, there's no way going around it, you can also sabotage your opponents and work as hard on disrupting their activities as you will on expanding yours. Interestingly enough, all 4 of your opponents can be humans too, and you don't have to play against the CPU only. That said, multiplayer does not support hot seat and only network play. So couch versus at one PC playing together and arguing as you would in most other games in the early 90s is sadly not the case here. Airline Tycoon's graphics are very nice and humorously designed, and the sounds are rather good too, though nothing special in particular, but that's to be expected from a purely management game. It's not the presentation that makes or breaks the games however, but gameplay. Unfortunately, there's heaps of it in Airline Tycoon, and if you like business management titles, you're not gonna be bored here. Working on offering better services at higher profit margins, eliminating the competition in the process. It's worth pointing out though that Airline Tycoon is not the most demanding game out there, and if you expect a considerable challenge, other titles may be a better pick. Prisoner of Ice is a tough cookie to crack. On one hand, it's inspired by H.P. Lovecraft and stylized to be similar to his works, with beautiful high-resolution graphics, which in some screens seems more like paintings than digital art. And on another, it's crippled by high degree of linearity and invisible walls of wrongful progress. Wow, what a name! I'm coining it today, write that down. What I mean by that is that you can't use objects in wrong places, and all the actions that do not push the plot forward end up with a generic "you can't do that" response, taking you out of experience, sounding generic like a wall that you cannot pass. Not to mention certain few pixels in size objects that not only have to be found at their precise locations, but are also clicked on. And in high-res display with a mouse, yet alone the mouse you could get in the 90s, it was easier said than done. And the last drop in this already overfilling bucket are illogical puzzles that often require use of seemingly unfitting objects, which in turn makes you scout each and every area top to bottom, trying to find everything, as you never know what and where will be needed. So why is Prisoner of Ice even here if there's so much wrong with it? It's elementary, which coincidentally is a phrase that Sherlock never spoke in any of the books and is a creation coming straight from TV and movies only. I seem to be getting off topic here, so let's jump back on it. Prisoner of Ice is here because despite all the issues, its plot is not only one of the best in the horror adventure genre, but it's also excellently paced, and you will find yourself immersed in it quite easily if you're into dark horror and can overlook few minor annoyances. Upon its release, Colin mcrae Riley became a hit, and an instant one at that. It released on Windows and on the PlayStation at the same time and sold better on the latter than virtually any other racer at the time did. But why was it such a huge success coming seemingly out of nowhere? Well, it was the best rally game of its time and an excellently balanced title mixing simulation and arcade racing aspects perfectly, with neither of them taking the forefront and both adding to the experience. It features 8 real-life cars like the famous Colin mcrae's Subaru Impreza, all drivers from the 1998 World Rally Championship season and a selection of 52 stages split over 8 different countries. All that available in 3 game modes. Championship, which sees you racing on all stages in the full season mode against real-life drivers of the time. Rally, allowing you to take part in a single rally in any of the countries that you've unlocked in Championship. And finally, Time Trial is, well, exactly what its name suggests, and you're trying to beat the previous best time on any course in the game, either alone or head-to-head in split screen with someone else. Each of the cars feels different when driving, so everyone should be able to find one that they'll be comfortable behind the steering wheel and capable for going for the championship in. Colin mcrae Rally came out in time when previous Rally Championship and V-Rally games were considered a benchmark in WRC racing. It came and pushed them off the podium, easily taking the top spot. Especially that with excellent graphics, the sensation of speed and daredevil driving, also came the presentation. The graphics were incredible for the time, especially the cars, which were high polygon and high detail, but the trucks and roadside objects were quite good too, making the game feel very enchanting and realistic. Oh, and the pilot that sat next to you and shouted all the turns, jumps and bumps out was just fantastic. In behind the wheel view with good headphones on in 1998, Colin mcrae Rally was the best way you could feel as if you were really driving on one of those mud-covered forests tracks, and no other title could offer such immersion in the same quality level. Tex Murphy Overseer is the 5th title in the futuristic dark noir series of private detective-themed point-and-click adventure games. Same as 2 previous outings, Overseer combines FMV sequences with 3D environments and also takes place in post-World War III San Francisco divided between the so-called norms and mutants. And while it's set in 2043, most of the plot is told via retrospectives in conversations between Tex and his then beloved Chelsea Bando, in which he recalls the events of his first case from 2037. Interestingly enough, said case is basically a retelling of Mean Streets, so the first game's story, but with some slight changes. For one, it's more detailed and realistic, secondly, the locations of most important events have been changed too, and finally, plot diverts from original a bit here and there, which means that theoretically one of both of these games, first or last, is through Overseer losing its in-lore status. The story goes as follows. In 2037, Tex was hired by Sylvia Linsky, the very one who would later on become his future wife and now ex-wife, to investigate the case of her father's supposed suicide. At least Cabs deemed it so, closing the investigation while she believed that it was a murder. Turns out, she was right, and Tex becomes intertwined in a plot involving implants and mind control, eventually finding himself in a position of being the only one who could stop it. The game still uses the so-called virtual world engine, meaning that outside of conversations you're basically free to explore every nook and cranny of available locations, searching for hints and clues, turning around and being able to look everywhere. The aforementioned conversations are a treat too, and very often as funny as they can be dark and in the very same climate they were in previous series entries. Overseer is a considerable step up in terms of presentation as compared to previous titles too. The gameplay window is window no more and can take the whole screen. The graphics are bumped from 256 colors to true color, so 16 million, and henceforth Overseer feels much more atmospheric, close to life and immersive. With these changes naturally came change in the requirements, and running Overseer at the time on anything weaker than Pentium 2 with 3D acceleration meant having to cut down on the quality. Tex Murphy Overseer could be played in one of 2 modes: Entertainer, that allowed for bypassing of some of the puzzles and featured hints, and Gamer, in which all puzzles were mandatory and no hints were provided. I'd hate to break it to you, but playing it on anything else than the Gamer was a mistake, as it's an experience like no other in 1998, and it's not worth to water it down, allowing some of the puzzles to be missed. Fighting Force is the first 3D brawler / beat 'em up that I ever played, and that's why it holds a special place in my heart. I know it's not the best, I know it's not the most innovative, and I know it's not even the best looking, but, like I said, to me it was special. And it's a Streets of Rage or Final Fight type of a game, but in 3D. So you pick one of 4 unique characters going through the urban environments of a large city and later on super secret evil villain's headquarters island, battling never-ending waves of enemies. I'm exaggerating, of course, as if they didn't end we wouldn't have levels in the game, and we most definitely do. Also, the location is not as secret as we know exactly where it is, but we do now, years later. In 1998, it was still a mystery. Anyway, same as in most other beat-em-ups, use of found objects like knives, cans or guns is not only possible, but advisable, and the game allowed for picking up of routes you'll go through from time to time, which considerably extended Fighting Force's replayability, because seeing all that it has to offer required at least few playthroughs. Dr. Dex Zeng, criminal mastermind with a literal pirate army at his disposal, predicted that the world would end in the year 2000. As the New Year's Eve of 1999 came, he realized that there was an unmistakable error in his predictions, and instead of doing what grown-ups do, so learning from the experience and putting it all behind, outgrowing the failure, he went the kindergarten way and decided to ensure the world's destruction himself. One has to wonder why would any of his goons follow him knowing that he wants to destroy the world? But since the cults are not a new thing, we can safely assume that that's the reasoning behind their behavior. All 4 characters that you can play as are different and unique in their sets of regular and special attacks, and one of them can even lift and throw a car engines. Which, you know, was hella cool back then when I played it first. Fighting Force can naturally be enjoyed with a friend on the same PC, and that's the best way to experience it, and one I would recommend if you have a choice. When I saw The Godfather for the first time sitting through its ungodly long run, I felt as if the world around me changed. I wanted to be a mobster, a crime family lieutenant, and even eventually a boss. But first, I decided to read the book, and since I grew up in a house full of them, I didn't have to look for long. It was so much better than this already brilliant movie. I mean, I think I devoured the book in like 2-3 sitting stops, so naturally after seeing The Godfather, then reading it, and realizing that I could never really leave it, so to speak, I wanted to at the very least play it. And while there were games that kinda quote-unquote touched the subject, like Pizza Tycoon for instance, there was nothing that would focus completely on the subject. Enter Gangsters Organized Crime. It was a unique title taking place in a fictional Chicago suburb of New Temperance during Prohibition, and at the considerable scope, with borough featuring over 5,000 unique citizens, 400 of these being gangsters. And overall speaking, your goal naturally is to secure as much money as possible through bribery, theft and aggression, among others. In practice there are specific winning conditions, but we'll get to that in a bit. Gameplay is a combination of turns and real time. So, first you issue all the orders to your lieutenants and then they act on them in real time. But to become the most respected and richest crime lord out there, you have to make sure to keep all the other gangs at bay and expand your territory to secure sources of income, which means having local businesses pay you protection money. You'll also need to expand on your gang size and arm all your hoods to the teeth, keeping in mind their unique abilities, as these all make them useful for different kinds of missions and activities. So you have to be both jack of all trades and master of all. Yeah, I know what I said. All that to telegraph the strength of your gang and to be ready to be able to handle everything that the opposing families and the game will throw at you. Nothing's free though, and since the protection money is hardly enough to cover some of the basic expenses, you'll also need to purchase businesses, both legal and otherwise. Raid opposing families' businesses, bribe people left and right to ensure the standing and security of your gang in the city. There are 3 ways to win the game of Gangsters. First, so-called get straight, which requires you to earn a particular large sum of money, catch being that it has to come from legal businesses only. And on top of that, you need to make sure that none of your hoods are wanted by the police, and eventually retire from crime, which seems easy, but just because you may want to go clean, doesn't mean that the other gangs that oppose you will treat you any different. The second is getting elected as mayor. This one requires a good lawyer, Jimmy McGill kind of a lawyer, a lot of money, huge territory under your control, and if that wasn't enough, secure loads of votes. So, happiness of citizens will be your priority and not the money from protection. So you'll need to protect your regions, raid the opponents, and don't get in the way of your voters' day-to-day lives too much. Finally, domination, and it's the most difficult winning condition out of them all. It requires a complete destruction of all the other gangs. The difficulty doesn't come from their opposition, however, but from the heat that all your attacks on them will generate, and directly following it, police and FBI interest in you and your gang's activities. Xcom Interceptor is the 4th main game in the Xcom franchise series, an editor from the classic turn-based strategy with RPG formula. This time, Xcom is a mixture of space combat and business simulation with strategy elements. So, you manage numerous Xcom space stations, pilot starships during combat encounters, be it interception, base defense or base attack. And yes, sadly, generally speaking, that's all you'll be doing behind the steering stick. alone and by coordinating your wingman. Other than that, you'll also manage your base's resources and double in research. And the research tree is very disappointing, lacking in both scope and breadth, feeling devoid of anything noteworthy when compared to earlier games. Interceptor is very combat focused, and that's also its biggest problem, because unfortunately, it's not very fun. Sure, it's not the worst you've seen, but compared to other space-based shooters out there like Wing Commander, it falls short in terms of both variety and fun. Story-wise, because all Xcom games have to have one, the game begins on March 1st, 2067. Earth's resources are nearly depleted, and whatever's left is so difficult to extract that it's not worth the money or effort anymore. So, to avert the seemingly inevitable fall of humanity, major corporations turned to space, and more specifically area of it known only as the Frontier. It's raw materials rich, so a great place for us to find what we need to survive that little bit longer. What we didn't realize at first glance though, is that the area is not empty at all and is already in the scope of interest of aliens we've met during the first alien war depicted in the first game. You're part of an elite force chosen for their tenacity, skill and perseverance, and tasked with hunting down and defeating aliens in space. Xcom Interceptor, while an interesting sidestep from the mainline games, was not very good at what it was best at. Which sounds odd, but best explains its faults, and was most definitely not what fans of the series wanted. While Julian Gollop of Xcom fame may have not had a lot to do with Interceptor we just spoke about, he was a mastermind behind Magic and Mayhem. The game, not in real life. And it's a real-time strategy with role-playing elements. Also, one of the few games in the genre that I can actually enjoy to some degree, which is not something you'll hear me saying about RTSs often. Probably because it's not a typical representative of the genre in any shape or form. You play as Cornelius, a mage, on a quest to find his missing uncle Luca, a great mage who mysteriously disappeared while fighting against the evil overlord. A villain who's for once in gaming appropriately menacingly named. To find your uncle, you'll need to traverse through 12 levels, finding and defeating evil archmages in each. You'll do so by using a variety of spells, mainly summons, although while doing so smartly not to use up all of your mana too fast, as it can only be charged up in the so-called places of power that require capturing first. And it's that titular magic that the game revolves around, as you have no real armies. All units that you command are summoned and all the buffs and protection spells come from you. Before each stage you pick which spells to take with you, so that you're sorta responsible for deciding what will your magical arsenal for that mission consist of. That said, you can find various items in the game, anything from summoning stones through artifacts enhancing your abilities to talismans granting new spells. Each of the 12 levels, or realms if you will, has its own team and is randomly generated. Yep, you heard that right. Each next playthrough of Magic and Mayhem can feel and play out different, as the maps are never the same. But neither story-based characters nor buildings will, so the plot always stays the same and it's the map layout that is amended only. Each completed level rewards you with experience, which you can use to increase your attribute. You know, to become bigger, bulkier and stronger. Oh wait, wrong game. I know, to become wiser, more powerful and deadly in the Arcana. That's more like it. Presentation-wise, Magic and Mayhem, while only being top-down isometric, looks fantastic. It's colorful, but the attention to detail spills from the screen in everything that the game entails. From backgrounds to little touches like buildings being destructible, especially under certain spells, fire spreading and eating everything in its way, or even as small and charming touches as idle and combat animations. Notable example of being your zombies tearing their own arms to use them as clubs against the enemies. It's just great. Sounds and music are excellent too and well fit to the theme of the adventure. Magic and Mayhem is a very special game. It's not too difficult, not too easy, it seems to be in this perfect middle spot, providing plenty enough challenge to anyone without being punishing or annoying. This one's gonna be a bit difficult for me to talk about, as it's the one that killed my love for the entire franchise. But don't let it sway you into not appreciating it, as it's hell of a game, just changed to the point as compared to the previous ones that I did not enjoy it as much as I should. Anyway, Settlers 3 is a real-time city building / combat game. It features 3 unique nations of Romans, Egyptians and Japanese, and they fight it against each other in the name of deities that they believe in, who are all coincidentally addressed by their subjects as he. So, I suppose in the theme of the game that would be you. Anyway, for the most part Settlers 3 is very similar to the previous ones, meaning that a lot of focus initially is put on a city building and creation of advanced nation serving supply and demand chains. This time with different economic models for each of the nations, making them feel unique and multiple playthroughs more viable. They also have their own buildings, cleric spells and abilities, ensuring high replayability. Supposedly, as I always felt that Settlers 3 lost a lot of charm as compared to Settlers 2 Gold. I was in the minority though, as it sold very well and became universally liked and appreciated game. One change that I had very mixed feelings about, not necessarily good or bad, but something between the two, were the roads. In previous games, there were the veins that kept the entire body of the nation running, moving resources and units between the locations, and being the base of everything that happened in the city/kingdom. So, a correct, smart and well thought out road layout could make a huge difference in nearly all that the game had to offer. In Settlers 3, you don't build roads at all. They are created naturally, organically on pathways that are most walked by your citizens. On one hand, it makes a lot of sense, as it's fitting to the whole pre-medieval town theme, but on another, in real life, roads were built even in ancient Rome, and large cities and kingdoms definitely had them made rather than appear in the place of a beaten path. Like I said, it's a very polarizing subject to me, and I don't know how to feel about it. Also, Settlers 3 finally allowed for a direct control of all military units. Perhaps I don't subscribe to the combat RTS genre lovers club. What a name, I wish something like that really existed. But that change made the combat much more efficient and dependent on the gamer's skills, for better or worse. Settlers 3 is not a bad game, not in the slightest. It's just one that alienated me from its series, and I'm not sure why really. I should really give it a chance again, shouldn't I? Or do I get and try the new one out? What do you think? Billionaire is an excellent take on the Monopoly formula that can be played in single or two-player mode. And it's easily one of my most favorite games following the board game idea. Well, based on it really, as it does a lot of things differently. Same as in Monopoly, you can buy properties and erect buildings on them too. These are houses, hotels, offices and skyscrapers among others, so even in that aspect alone, there's much more variety here. You also have a bit more influence on the amount charged when someone enters your property, which is always fun. You can buy businesses and build your own companies in Billionaire too, and rename/name them for that extra little touch of fun. So, it's not unusual when playing against someone to have your Microsoft perform better than your opponent's Apple or vice versa. What's more, they are actually a functioning stock market companies, meaning their stocks perform better or worse and can be purchased by other players if available on the market. So, a game can even sometimes come down to one player having considerably more properties and companies, but the other one winning despite that, because of securing more capital initially and buying controlling portions of shares in the first one's companies when they were still cheap and effectively being the first to get to the billion in net worth. Oh, because of course I failed to mention it, that you are racing to get to the billion. Silly me. Billionaire, being as expanded on the original idea as it was still prone to the same issues. Namely, if the players were not more or less on the same level, at some point it was possible to predict with near 100% accuracy which one of them would win. And since it's a computer game and neither of the players can be a bank, there's no chance for a quote-unquote sudden secret injection of cash to anyone's pocket to carry on gaming, and only limited official bank loans. But all I just told you about Billionaire is just scratching the surface. There is much more content in the game. It is, after all, an ultimate Monopoly experience that you can have on PC. So, if you're interested, definitely check it out. If the title hasn't given it away yet, Viper Racing is all about racing snakes. So you can pick either Cobra, Anaconda or… wait, hold on a sec. Nope, wrong game. Sorry, in Viper Racing, you're racing in a Dodge Viper. Its physics engine was unparalleled at the time and one of its most prominent features. So, while speeding, you not only have to keep an eye on your opponents, but also things like inertia, torque, aerodynamics, weight transfer, brake and tire wear, and clutch. I mean, you can set clutch to auto if you don't want to bother yourself with it, but if you do, you gotta set a key for it and use it. It's something I've not seen in any other game by then. Well, other than in those games that used steering wheel and pedals. Anyway, since the physics are so realistic, it's crucial to be able to make appropriate changes to how your car behaves, and naturally, you can. All the aerodynamics, drivetrain and suspension are adjustable and allow for complete freedom of tinkering. Damage model is nothing to scoff at either, and adds to fun of burning the asphalt. I mean, if you ever end up hitting a wall at high speed, the suspension may bend, making it incredibly difficult to drive in a straight line. And such attention to detail was not very common in racers at the time. Come to think of it, all crashes, bumps and hits, big and small, seem to be reflected realistically on the vehicle in the form of various deformations and such. But all that is what's under the hood of the game, so to speak. So what's in the forefront? Well, 8 unique tracks that can be driven both ways, 3 game modes, with career being the most complete and offering progressive upgrades indirectly based on your results in previous races, but most of all, Viper racing is fun, if you like simulations and are okay with having only one car to race in. I mean, user-made content has long expanded on the available vehicles, but straight out of the box the game featured only one car and 8 tracks. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, for many of you, a sheer thought of having to play an incredibly, at least for the time, realistic driving simulation with true-to-life physics and damage model is enough to gobble this street of a game without questioning it. For me, it's not enough. Not only I prefer arcade racers, because I'm crap at simulations, never tried hiding it either, let's be clear here, but also I lose attention quickly, so having a lot of variety is a key to keep me glued to the screen. A single vehicle and handful of tracks is just not enough. But that's a me problem. And technically speaking, there's nothing wrong with Viper racing. Codename Tenka, Life Force Tenka or just Tenka, is Psygnosis' sci-fi themed FPS. In the year 2096, Earth is torn by numerous wars, the pollution caused it to become in large parts inhospitable, and it's a generally speaking not a fun place to live on. Those who are still living on the planet dream of escaping to Extrivius 328, an off-world colony that's said to be a promised land. As we know, promises are hardly ever real, and this one's no different. The colony is run by a huge conglomerate known as Trojan Incorporated that secretly manufactures condoms. I mean, bionoids. Half men, half droids, engineered to be obedient killing machines. Worst of all, it does so using oblivious to it all colonists. You play as Joseph B. Tenka, and upon discovery of such procedures and your name being on a list for transformation, you decide to put an end to these immoral activities. The game is divided into 20 separate stages, each with its own set of objectives. But since it's a FPS, as long as you keep going forward and killing everything, you should pretty much always fulfill them all. Interestingly enough, unlike most other FPSs, in Tenka you don't find new weapons per se, but add-ons to your built-in universal weapon called SG-26 Self-Generating Polymorphic Armory, an unnecessarily cool name for a rather boring weapon. Especially that you can switch between those add-ons same you would have between different weapons. So yeah, you guessed it right, it's a gimmick. Anyway, levels are rather big, but not very interestingly designed. They do make up for it with plenty of blood pressure raising surprise attacks, climatic sound cues and overall atmosphere that makes the whole fair more aliens than Dune. If you're a fan of FPSs, it's a no-brainer and a game you should definitely check out. But if you're not, then let the footage running in the background help you make your own mind about it. In Croc Legend of the Gobbos, which I always mistakenly thought was called Croc The Legend of Gobbos, you play as, yep, you guessed it right, anthropomorphic crocodile. And it's a third-person view, full 3D action platformer and a pretty good one at that. And no wonder, as originally the protagonist was not a croc, but Yoshi. Yep, the very same dino you know from Mario games. The devs presented the game to Nintendo as a prototype featuring their character, but since Big N shown no interest in it, Croc was rebranded, main character and setting changed, and that's how we ended up with our reptile hero. In vein of 2D Mario games, however, your goal in each of the stages is that simple: to get to the end of them, to the gong, all the while saving as many gobbos on your way as possible. The game uses overworld map split into 7 unique realms set on islands, and the stages can be over and underground and occasionally underwater too. You are a croc after all, and neither are especially foreign to you. Each level is filled with obstacles and enemies, and every now and then you face bosses aptly named guardians as they're guarding your way to progress. Since there's a balance in the nature, however, or at least there should be one, if there's bad, there's gotta be a good in the world of Croc too. So, naturally, you also get to 3 gobbos, of which there are 6 per stage, collect crystal orbs that replenish your health, red hearts that offer extra lives and jigsaw puzzles. If you collect all of these last, the game unlocks a secret extra world with extra levels to play in. Saving of gobbos is perhaps not mandatory to complete the game, but since you're a hero, you're gonna do it regardless of what I have to say about it. But if you do, and if you get them all, you will unlock game's final boss, and after putting him in his place, the true game ending. You can run, jump, climb and swim, and your main attack is a full circle tail swipe. You can also break crates with collectibles by jumping on them. Story-wise, Croc was found as a kid by a king of gobbos, Rufus, floating in a basket down the river. Rufus decided to save little Croc and raise him as his own. Years have passed and Croc's more of a gobbo than a crocodile, in everything but the looks. On one of those idyllic days, you know, when the sun is shining, when there's nothing to do and you sit outside being bored and just appreciating the peace and warmth, an evil Baron Dante and his goons began to terrorize gobbos, capturing and imprisoning them in cages. King Rufus failed to escape the captivity too, but in the last-ditch effort saved his adopted son, Croc. Now, in safety, playing as Croc, you're left with no choice than to head off to defeat the villain, save your father and all the other gobbos that you come across. Crime Killer is kinda like Carmageddon, but also not at all. I know, I've lost you, but let me try to explain. It's a racing/shooter game in which you play as the son of a cop that was killed in the line of duty. Determined to avenge your father's death, you join the force seeking revenge. There are 3 vehicles that you'll be controlling: a futuristic car, a futuristic bike, and yes, I'm going to repeat myself here, futuristic hovering vehicle known as the Flying Wing. The game revolves mainly around chasing bad guys around the city and either blowing them up with your cannon, a whole myriad of other powered-up weapons, or disabling them using the so-called sonic destabilizer, which coincidentally sounds like something a Bond villain would use to change the world's weather patterns with. The game is divided into 15 levels, each requiring numerous missions to be completed in order to progress to the next. And I shit you not here, there are over 400 different missions you may be assigned to. That's a lot, don't you think? And it's everything from drug busts, car bombings, jailbreaks, as in preventing them and not participating, through hunting corporate defectors and stopping missile attacks, all the way to shootouts with bank robbers, chasing down speedsters and putting down of smugglers. Sounds cool, right? Well, as much as I actually did enjoy my short time with Crime Killers, the variety I just told you about is superficial only. Cause while 400 is a huge number indeed, all you really have to do in each of the stages is to chase someone down and destroy them. Rinse and repeat. No, really, that's pretty much it. There's no extra separate game modes, side games, nothing. You search for your target, you destroy it, and the mission is complete. Complete plenty enough of them, and the stage is done, and you're ready to move to the next. Now, why would you be interested in such a simple and straightforward romp? It's fun, that's why. Nothing more to it. It's repeatable, sure. It's decently looking and sounding, sure. It's hella fluid running if your system can handle it, also sure. And it's good and all, but the only reason you'll have to carry on is the fun factor, which may not be high enough to get you through the whole game, but will definitely keep you glued to it for a few good hours. I freaking loved The Fifth Element, the movie that is. Bruce Willis back then was my favorite actor, because it was still a time in my life when I had favorites, and it was a sci-fi action-packed romp full of little jokes and funny interactions. Also, Mila Jovovich. And Lilu Multipass? It was a blockbuster, both in reality and in my heart, and I must have rewatched it at least a dozen times. As film licenses go, the tie-in games are more often than not trash, so while I was eager to check it out, I was worried that it will disappoint me. It didn't, and ended up being pretty decent. Mind you, I did not say great. While the game is naturally a bit different from the movie, it follows pretty much the same plot, and is a third-person action-adventure. You play as Corbin Dallas and Lilu, alternating, with Corbin sporting one of 4 available in the game guns, and Lilu doing her hand-to-hand chosen one combat magic. You travel through a series of locations from the movie, searching for the 4 elements that you'll need to stop the approaching Earth at an alarming pace ultimate evil. While the combat and overall action is rather fun, the Fifth Element, despite coming out a year after the movie, feels rushed to me. There are 30 levels in the game, but it's just a veil pulled over your eyes and something that looks good on a video game box cover. In reality, there's only 15 of them. And after you go through them with Corbin, you'll have to complete them once more with Lilu. This second time conveniently with enemies unable to shoot. Weird. The stages have been more than recycled, they feel copy-pasted. And when you compare the locations in-game to those found in the movie, you'll quickly realize that the authors picked the least fun possible of them, easiest to render, graphically unspectacular, and offering limited gameplay possibilities. Mainly corridors and closed-off rooms with very sporadic outside locations. In the end, The Fifth Element is neither a great shooter when playing with Corbin, nor a good brawler with Lilu. It's an average to decent action game that's perhaps not disappointing, but also nothing you'll be replaying years after completing it first. Micro Machines V3 is the last game in the Codemasters top-down mini-racer series. The first 2 I particularly enjoyed playing against friends, as they offered very simple mechanics with multiplayer-focused gameplay loop, perfect for quick fun races and short but massive endorphin bursts, shooting straight into your brain, keeping you entertained whether you were winning or not. The third one is no different. So one would think that it's an ideal title to sink some hours in, and in reality it is, but also isn't. While it could be argued that it's the best one of them all, offering a whopping 48 different stages, portraying everyday locations, everything from breakfast tables through ponds, sandboxes, bathtubs to pool tables and anything in between, tons of different vehicles, big, small, fast and slow, modern 3D presentation, more obstacles than ever before and even some optional weapons. And yet, somehow, something feels odd about it. Don't get me wrong, it's an amazing and hella fun game, but it never grabbed me same way the older ones did. And it's hard to say why, because if it sounds and looks better than ever, if it has more features than previous two titles combined, and still sports same addictive racing mechanic based on scoring points by overtaking the opponent by a screen length, it should be as captivating, right? Well, judging by the Moby Games score, most of you do think so. For me, it lost something. I don't know what it was, but it was not there anymore. Or better yet, it was there, still and all along, but I changed. And it's perhaps the perspective of years of gaming and having to sample a huge chunk of all titles that released on PC made me not feel as fired up about it as I would have years earlier. I don't know. It's a fabulous game that I feel very little nostalgia for, but if you're looking for a quick and action-packed party racer, Micro Machines V3 with its 8-player party mode is definitely one of the most enjoyable experiences you can have on PC. A human memory is a funny thing. You often think that you know something, you're like 100% or near 100% sure that you do, and then you start reading about it, just to refresh what you know or check if nothing changed, and suddenly you realize you got it all wrong. All because your mind joined two totally unrelated facts in a wrong way. And that's what happened with Forsaken and I. I've wrote a long intro to it, comparing it to other greats and eagerly awaited titles, cornerstones of gaming and such, just to realize that the constantly delayed and eventually disappointing game that I was thinking of all along was Daikatana. And Forsaken is incredible. It's a first-person sci-fi shooter very similar to equally as good Descent. A bit different playing though. Earth is no longer a seed of life in otherwise dead space as it's always been, but a largely uninhabitable, irradiated rock that's a shadow of its former self. Destroyed and devastated in 2113 by an experiment that went astray and caused a huge explosion which resulted in a shockwave destroying everything. And I really mean everything here. The solar system has been declared, yep, you guessed it right, forsaken. No one lives on the planet anymore and it's only visited by those who still, against its harsh conditions and common sense, scout and search for the few remaining and precious resources, gold being the chief of them. So they travel around the vast and unstable underground cave systems seeking riches. You're one such person, a hoverbike-riding adventurer, keen on scoring big and changing his life for the better. So you have to go through a series of pretty big levels, most of them timed I must add, getting to the end of each, avoiding all collapsing tunnels, spikes, turbines and various other hazards, all the while collecting priceless loot and shooting down countless enemies. Enemies that adjust their approach and attack patterns based on which of the 25 included weapons you're carrying and past encounters. Meaning that the more you fight with them, and you'll have to all the freaking time, the more they learn more about you. So, having a moment-to-moment approach to each combat encounter rather than one seemingly foolproof approach will do better for you in the long run, as they won't collect enough data to outsmart you. There are 15 different characters to pick between, and honestly, the selection is important only for multiplayer, which on a side note was fantastic. In solo gameplay, they end up being just the choice of voice of the protagonist. You start with 2 basic weapons and collect upgrades that are scattered around the levels. On a face value, when you launch it and just start playing, without bothering yourself with realistically speaking unimportant story too much, Forsaken seems just like a Descent clone. But, and you can unleash the hounds of hate in the comments on me now, I'd risk saying that it's better looking, better sounding and more fun of a game than the one it was based on. And in multiplayer, where up to 12 of you can chase around the narrow and dangerous corridors pew-pewing each other into non-existence, it's something that Descent even more so couldn't compare to. If you like shooters, especially those in 3D, do not sleep on Forsaken. It may be the best entire 1998 had to offer. Darius Gaiden is a 5th game in the series of arcade horizontal scrolling shoot 'em ups. And same as all the other ones, this one's a mother effort to beat. It's not impossible, not what I'm saying, it's just me who sucks at it. Big time. This time you're piloting Silverhawk, a starship armed to the teeth and on a mission to destroy the evil Belsar Empire before it wipes out whatever's left of the population of planet Darius. The game progresses non-linearly, meaning out of 27 stages included in each playthrough you'll only get to see 7, picking where to go after each and every completed level. Most enemies resemble aquatic creatures and that goes for all, regular ones, mid-level and end-level bosses too. It's an interesting design, not my first choice if I had anything to say about it, but they're done with care and attention to detail, so there's nothing really to pick on here, and I'm just mentioning it as something I wouldn't have settled on. As you plow through the sea-inspired fauna, spreading projectile serve justice left and right, one shot at a time, you'll be able to pick up various power-ups. They come in the form of colorful emblems, each color corresponding to a different one. Green grants you missiles, red increases the length and power of your shots, and blue enables access to shield. And collecting many of the same kind increases the add-on's power even further. In short, same as in life, the more you have, the better. Other than the regular weapons, you also have access to the so-called black hole bombs, that's capable of swallowing both screen worth of enemies and their projectiles. It's your ultimate weapon and should only be used when you see no other way of carrying on unscathed, or by mistakenly tapping on the button corresponding to it in a heat of the battle, which may be a use case unique to me, but it happens. To me, whatever. Additionally, Darius gaiden added an interesting mechanic that was not present in the previous entries, namely the ability to capture mid-level bosses when defeated, so that they could then join you for a little while to fight on your side. My experience with shoot-em-ups other than Deluxe Galaga and Warblade is kinda like my experience with hard liquors. So I like them, but hardly ever feel good after spending time at them for a while, and nearly always a day after promise myself not to do it ever again. Fatal Abyss is what my boss's wife has instead of the heart. A bottomless cavity that's as dark as a dark hole and so massive in weight and nut scale that its gravitational field is sucking life and happiness out of anyone unfortunate enough to come across her. I heard that the government once toyed with the idea of dropping her behind the enemy lines during military conflicts. You know, to have her dispose of the enemies by radiating hate, prejudice and anger at them at such high rates that they would take their own lives. Unfortunately, the project was abandoned in the planning stages, as whomever approached her with the idea either became so depressed, powerless and unwilling to carry on that they suffered a near-instant decline into vegetative state, kept alive by the constantly working machinery alone, or lost their mind when faced with pure evil. Fact. Also, by a total coincidence, Fatal Abyss is a first and third person underwater shooter. Both of these can be found in Wikipedia under the Fatal Abyss, so make sure not to click on the wrong one. The game will take you through 7 unique underwater realms split into 24 missions, each with their own objectives. The craft that you'll be taking onto the adventure can be armed with 10 offensive and defensive pieces of equipment, and learning the controls and how the sub behaves underwater is a key to success. Initially, Fatal Abyss may appear to be difficult, but when you get used to it, you'll be blasting the enemies all around. But what is your motivation here, you may wonder? Well, in the far-off future, a new and near-limitless power source is discovered. It is not mineable resource of any kind, however, but a bacteria living at the ocean floor, so-called Bacteria 241. And this is where I'd like to congratulate the devs on creativity. They nailed it down with this one, and hardly ever I get to witness such a dedication. If there ever would be a follow-up, I bet you'd be seeking Bacteria 123 in it. Anyway, 2 factions fight for control of said power source, and it's either Ecosystems or Proteus Tech, and you can pick for which one you'd like to play at the beginning of the game. One wants to split the energy with the world, while the other aims to harness it for its own purposes. Gameplay-wise, they may not feel very different at all, but it's nice to have a choice, don't you think? And if you forget about the story altogether and treat the game as kill everything and carry on kind of a title, you'll have much more fun. Graphics and sounds are rather good, and you kinda really feel as if you were moving underwater when playing, but the action is not very actiony, for the lack of a better word, and you rarely feel as if you were overwhelmed by an onslaught of the enemy forces. The difficulty comes from the controls, which are not very user-friendly and require getting used to. Just a few minutes ago I said that Forsaken is like Descent but better. Well, Fatal Abyss is like it too, but not as good. Unreal is a first-person shooter and a title that pioneered the arena shooter genre along with its campaign and debuted Epic's now state-of-the-art Unreal Engine. You're a prisoner 849 aboard a prison ship Vortex Rikers on a route to a moon-based prison. Not our moon, some other moon somewhere. Maybe Sailor Moon, who knows. On your way there, however, the ship has been captured by a gravitational field of an uncharted planet called Napali that pulled it in, crushing it into its surface. Unfortunately, most passengers died. Fortunately, you didn't. I mean, of course you didn't, cause you're you and like near indestructible, but there was a slight chance that you may have not came out alive. Still, you're okay and left on an unknown planet that has a breathable atmosphere, so it's a small success at least. It also houses primitive alien species of Nali that have been subjugated by a much more technologically advanced race of reptilian Scourge. And these have genetically engineered an enslaved race of crawl warriors with them, all to do their bidding. In these dire and unforeseen circumstances that you found yourself in, you've no other choice than to go through all of them, to find safety and eventually means of escape from Napali. As you go about it all, you'll find yourself dealing with both Scourge and Crawl and helping innocent Nali. Eventually killing the Scourge's queen and escaping the planet in an emergency pod, which sadly is left drifting in space with slim hopes of being found and rescued. Spoiler much? Yes, I do. Very much so indeed. The story is fine and all, but what we care about in our games is gameplay. And I'm happy to report that Unreal houses literally unreal amounts of fun within its action-packed campaign. There's 10 weapons in the game, each with 2 firing modes, so they feel as if there were 20, and it's a nice spread of normal through exotic to strictly alien-feeling pew-pewers. So while many shoot bullets, others focus on projectiles, blobs of toxic waste, or even super sped-up shrapnel or wall-ricocheting blades. You won't get bored with the included armament is what I'm saying. Other than the single player, there's multiplayer too, and in 2 modes no less. Either a co-op campaign, which just makes the adventure twice as fun, and few different forms of deathmatch, namely free-for-all, team deathmatch, king of the hill and dark match. That last being entirely dark, with just the player's searchlights being the only sources of illumination. Unreal polished established by the earlier game's multiplayer formula, focusing on blood pressure racing and action-packed arena shootouts with quick response and skill-based gameplay, rather than maze-like fights on standard story levels. I'm not a very proficient FPS gamer, and in multiplayer I'm mid all the way, dropping that left and right, if not shot, then hit by a rogue shrapnel. And Unreal was the first title that proved to me that I've made a much better choice years earlier, focusing on role-playing and strategy games. But I'm me and you're you, and I'm sure you rocked in Unreal, and it's multiplayer-only tournament follow-ups alike. Enemy infestation is what you get when my boss's wife enters our office. I mean, it's her business, she co-owns it, and I just work there, but she's definitely not a friend. She's kinda like diarrhea, you know? It happens, you didn't know why and where it came from, and you just gotta suffer through, hoping that after it's over, it won't be back for a while. No, let me rephrase that. She's exactly like diarrhea. Anyway, Enemy Infestation is quite coincidentally also a sci-fi themed squad-based RTS. And it's one that I've never played, so yeah, keep that in mind. Aliens landed on the human colony of Reda V, and we have to stop their invasion. Scratch that. Aliens crash landed in their colonizing pod in a fiery blaze on our far-off colony. And that's how the invasion begins. Enemy Infestation sends you on 27 blood pressure raising missions of various objectives, ranging from rescuing colonists to straightforward extermination of all alien forces and anything in between. So far it doesn't sound very special at all, does it? Well, it features a very unique mechanic of certain weapons having different effects on aliens and requiring you to always adjust what you're using so that you would stay as effective at debugging the colony as you are. For example, in one mission, your chosen weapon may freeze the enemies or even shrink them, making them easy targets for squashing. And as soon as you get used to it and think of it as the ultimate tool of distraction, patent pending, you may realize a mission or two away that the enemies somehow adjusted to that gun and now it multiplies them, effectively working against you and in their favor. Fortunately, it only affects those quote-unquote better weapons, so some of the less impressive ones always only pew-pew the aliens into a pile of goo. While objectives and weapon effects are really unusual for the genre and will keep you on your toes, the maps are rather disappointing. There's only 5 of them and the game keeps rotating them all throughout it. Which means that over 27 missions you'll become very intimate with their layout and know every inch of them by heart by the end game. But, and that's what I took from numerous reviews I read of it, but you will complete the game despite that, as it's ultimately a rather fun title, apparently worth the time investment. Blood to the Chosen is a sequel to the first one and takes place a little over 100 years later in 2028. Called formerly known as Cabal, is Cabal Co. now a huge corporation controlling most of what happens in a futuristic, cyberpunk-inspired city the game is set in. The world of Blood 2 is dark, grime and dystopian, just the way I hope it would be. Since demon worshipped by the Cabal, Chernobog, has been long gone following the events of the first Blood, Gideon, Cabal Co.'s CEO, aims to bring him back to life and kill Caleb. So, well, you. And that's the gist of it, really. From this point onward, you'll on your own and will have to destroy Cabal Co. and find and stop Gideon before it's too late. Blood to the Chosen could be simplified to one sentence. More of the same, but better. Or much better, really. As everything that it's built of has been expanded upon and made more enjoyable and involving. The levels are more diverse and unique than previously. They feature as many, if not more, even hidden areas worth finding and exploring. The visual design of Blood 2 is rather pleasant to the eye and the theme fitting too. With dark side alleys, wide roads and numerous buildings you'd think to find in a futuristic metropolis, so museums, science complexes, slums and the likes. There are many more kinds of enemies now too, and they are as dangerous as always and still dying in same-sized puddles of red goo as they used to. There are 17 weapons in Blood 2, many of them with dual shooting modes, so you'll have to familiarize yourself with them to pick your faves. Especially that there is only 10 weapon slots, so you will need to limit yourself to those that you like the most or those that work the best. Dealer's choice. I mean gamer's choice. You play as Caleb, obviously, and while there's few other playable so-called chosen characters to pick from, each with their own weapon specializations, all feeling unique and interesting in their own way, it's worth pointing out that the story movies are only played for Caleb, so at least your first playthrough should be as him. Blood 2 is a definite step up from its predecessor, and a pretty darn good game if you enjoy FPSs. King's Quest Mask of Eternity is the 8th installment in the series and the first one made entirely in full 3D. It's still an adventure RPG mixture, but this time with much more emphasis put on action sequences and role-playing, mainly on the first one. So the main protagonist Connor may encounter enemies and creatures he'd need to fight, and he can do it with either melee weapons or at range with a bow. Most puzzles that you'll encounter are inventory-based, but some dialogue and environmental ones will pop up from time to time too. Connor earns experience and level ups as you progress through the game, and both weapons and armor can be purchased for money obtained from defeated foes. Story-wise, the leader of all Archons, powerful wielders of magic, destroys the mystical Mask of Eternity. His doing sends out a powerful shockwave of magic energy, turning most of Kingdom's citizens into stone and scattering the mask pieces all around the world. You, playing as Connor, a villager/fighter and seemingly unimportant person in any way imaginable, seem to be the only one unharmed. So you pick up the mask piece that lands at your feet and head off to figure out what's what and, more importantly, why. Soon after, you learn from Halfstone Wizard what really transpired, what's your destiny, and he'll even conjure a magic map for you for good measure, and trust me, it will be very useful on your adventure, mainly for teleporting all around when it unlocks. So, being the unsuspected hero that you've become, you decide to save the Kingdom of Daventry and rescue everyone that's been petrified. Your adventure will take you through many different realms where you'll be helping people seeking mask pieces and, most importantly, clues on the location of the next ones, all the way to the Arch-Archon's altar room where you'll have to face him. Oh my, did I just spoil a portion of the ending? Ignore everything I said, I do not know or understand anything. I need an adult? Yeah, let's stick to that. Mask of Eternity was a huge sidestep from previous King's Quest games in the series. For one, transforming from 2D to 3D, in my eyes at least, was totally unnecessary and made it more arcadish than I liked it to be. And secondly, it's the first game in which you don't control a familiar member of the royal family, but a Mr. Nobody. Much less of an issue, but those who got used to the former ones will definitely notice. All in all, Mask of Eternity is a good game, not as good as the earlier ones were, but worth experiencing and completing nonetheless. Commandos Behind the Enemy Lines is a real-time squad-based tactics title taking place across the entire World War II theater, from North African deserts through Italy, France, all the way to Norway among others. The game is divided into 20 separate long and very tactical missions, through which you'll have to lead a group of 6 elite commandos, fulfilling various interestingly designed objectives. You'll destroy enemy installations of strategic importance, so explode them into non-existence. You'll sabotage their carefully crafted plans in different ways, sometimes showing up like a Spanish Inquisition, so unexpectedly and without prior warning armed to the teeth, in witty remarks and sarcasm. You'll assassinate their leaders, from afar or execution style, damage or incapacitate their vehicles, so battleships or trains to name a few. You'll rescue captured GIs and, generally speaking, cause as much disruption and commotion as it's possible, all to allow the allied forces to have a chance at winning the war. Now, not all 6 of your commandos will be available at all times, so mission will only call for use of a few. Each of those brave soldiers, however, have their own special and unique skill sets and characteristics. One's a trained killer, then there's a sniper, demolition expert, spy, diver and driver. And all of them are essential, so death of either will require a restart, as they will be needed in the future operations. You don't have to restart straight away though, and can spend your remaining time scouting them up and planning your second approach, because because if you look at Commandos objectively, it's actually a puzzle game, in which you need to figure out and then plan out the algorithm of how to complete each stage as efficiently and fast as possible. Each of the levels has a set of few specific objectives, which needs to be completed for the mission to end up a success. And while there's no set and written in stone single way of completing any of the levels, and most can be approached in different ways from different sides tackling objectives in your chosen order, some plans are definitely better than others. You can turn on preview of what the enemy sees, which will allow you to observe cones representing their view ranges. This will help to learn their patrol routes and plan your dance around them down to the last step. Also, many of the missions, especially later on, may require performing various tasks in different parts of the map at once or in close succession. Now, in most games it would require hella mouse and keyboard gymnastics and ungodly reaction times too. Fortunately, Commandos features kinda picture-in-picture mode, allowing you to keep a constant and hawk-like eye on up to 80 different locations in the game. So, problem solved. Upon its release, Commandos was a huge hit and quickly spawned a whole slew of follow-ups, all of them equally as good and successful. Warhammer Dark Omen is a real-time tactical strategy set in the fantasy world of Warhammer that originated from the tabletop game and is a direct sequel to 1995's Shadow of the Horned Rat. It features a number of improvements as compared to its predecessor, namely streamlined and more user-friendly interface, greater 3D generated terrain, using line of sight for ranged units for instance, improved army management, and much more focus on the plot, which is now linear but also more engaging and allowing you to influence it with some meaningful choices from time to time. But easily the biggest change of them all had to be the inclusion of multiplayer, which allowed players to lead any of the armies present in the game, so Imperial, Orcish or the Undead. And based on the score in these battles, players would be rewarded money that then they could use to prepare for the next encounter, which was a decent idea in theory, but hardly working in real-life environment, as it meant that the winner got more spoils and henceforth was better prepared for the next battle, having a considerable advantage against the loser. Story-wise, after stopping the Skaven plot in the former title, you and your group of mercenaries are called into the city of Altdorf for a meeting with Emperor Karl Franz. An honor like no other, but also such an unusual for a group of mercenaries situation to find themselves in, that it's clear from the get-go that something terrible must lurk on the horizon. And as predicted, you're told that the orcs started invading Border Princes from the south, seemingly out of nowhere, and by the looks of it, it's just the beginning of something bigger and more menacing. Naturally, you agree to help, and soon enough learn that the orcs were not just invading the kingdom, in fact, they were not invading at all, but running away from something much worse. Huge and seemingly unstoppable army of the undead. Dark Omen's story is much deeper than its earlier outing and will see many twists and turns, which, if you're a fan of the fantasy, will no doubt keep you engaged all the way through. And that, coupled with all the fixes and changes made to the Horned Rat's formula, made it an addictive and enjoyable package that most fans of RTSs will no doubt appreciate. Final Fantasy VII is a legendary postmodern steampunk RPG that stole the hearts of millions of gamers, was and is a favorite game in the series for as many, depicting a unique world where humans live along the robots, mutants and even dragons. Also, a game I never really got into. Now, before you threaten me with crucifixion, let me explain. I am not questioning its historical significance, depth of the story, or even quality of all of its building blocks. I understand it all and I appreciate it all, truly. It's just when it came out on PC, I was kinda internally struggling with finding will to play JRPGs at all, not this one in particular, finding them mechanically simplistic and focusing on the story only, and given that Baldur's Gate and second Fallout hit the market the very same year, the latter one especially, my RPG bone, please do not mistake it with boner, had enough experiences to tickle it to completion. Oh my god, however I wanna put it, and regardless how it sounds in my head, it always comes out wrong. Name of my sex tape. Still, what I mean is the timing was just not right. I was fighting an inner battle with JRPGs by 1998 and had my hands full of other Western role-playing titles that were what I was mainly into. And then the years passed and I just never came back to it. So yeah, now that you know, is it really worth it to go after me in the comments? It kinda is, for the algorithm, at least from my point of view, so do or do not, there is no try. Oh my god, cringe, I gotta stop this. The game sees its famous protagonist Cloudstrife party up with Barret, Tifa and few others to take on Sephiroth and Shinara Corporation that is the main supplier of advanced technology to the world of Final Fantasy, and it does so by fueling its inventions with the so-called macro energy. Energy that's harvested from the planet and one that is its near literal lifeblood. So, the more they take, the more imbalance is introduced into the nature and the closer is the complete collapse of the world. So, you and your merry group of hopeless heroes have to take on the corporation and stop Sephiroth from destroying the world. Final Fantasy's combat system is turn-based, tactical, and a natural progression of that seen in the earlier games in the series. It utilizes so-called limit breaks, unique and very powerful attacks available to pull off by characters that sustain plenty enough damage without dying to fill up their limit gauge. Each character can have few of these, and unlocking most will require completion of numerous in-game side activities. Final Fantasy's graphics are a mixture of pre-rendered static environments with real-time 3D characters, kinda like in Alone in the Dark, but dare I say it, less impactful. I dared. What did I mean by that though? Well, given the year, the quality of 3D characters was rather decent, even if unspectacular, but the backgrounds, so stages that the adventure took place on, were of lower resolution and quality. Sure, some of them looked very atmospheric and grungy, but the quality varied from location to location and wasn't always as high as you'd liked it to be. That said, the story, which is now so iconic that everyone more or less knows it, even those who'd never played the game, definitely defended Final Fantasy against all the complaints anyone might have had and is engraved in memories of most gamers of the time. Now, that's gonna be an unpopular opinion, and a second one in this video at that. I realize that I may upset some of you with it, but Mortal Kombat 4 was shit. It was the first full 3D game in the series and a natural evolution of the title. Yup, I know what I just said, it's not a praise. It came way too early though, and that evolution should have taken place 5 years later, when 3D matured a bit more, like a good wine, and when we finally had powerful enough systems to handle it looking good. What Mortal Kombat 4 was upon its release though, was a blocky and visually unattractive mess. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was not an inherently bad game, and there were definitely those that looked worse, but what it was Mortal Kombat. And after a series of excellent releases in the franchise, this was very disappointing. Anyway, it featured 15 different characters to choose from, with many of the fan favorites coming back to reprise their roles in the tournament, and some new ones complementing them with a wave of freshness. If I'm to be honest, I'd take Mortal Kombat 4 without these new combatants, if only the game would be more polished, especially in terms of presentation. Cause the way it looked, even compared to earlier 2D ones, was lacking. In earlier games, all fighters were human. Scratch that, in earlier games, most fighters were human, digitized and smoothly animated. Mortal Kombat 4 feels more like a game of puppets. Puppets that bleed, that is. Not all changes were for the worse though. Weapons were an interesting addition, perhaps not necessary and a bit over the top, but an interesting one and definitely prolonging the stay of the game. Ability to interact with the environment, like picking up of rocks, severed heads or dropped weapons, was fun too. And finally, removal of all the stupid babalities, friendships and the likes that diluted the series a little was a good call too. In MK4, it was 2 fatalities per character again and a dark and grim atmosphere all throughout. All that said, I still think it was shit. And I say it as someone who'd spent countless hours playing these turds, splashing fountains of red all over my screen, day in, day out. Why do I keep insisting that it's that bad? Because when I try to objectively compare it to these that came before and after, short of spin-off games obviously, then most of them in my opinion were much better. Maybe with an exception of Mortal Kombat Unchained, which was not great either, but that was a portable release only and port of much better Mortal Kombat Deception. Anyway, if you like versus fighters, Mortal Kombat and bucketfuls of blood, you'll probably enjoy MK4. But know that nearly any other game in the series is better. Gex Enter the Gecko is the second game in the series and a 3D action platformer in which you play as the titular Gex and have to navigate through a series of colorful levels stylized to be parodies of well-known TV series and movies, with Looney Tunes, Gilligan's Island, Star Wars and Friday the 13th being some of the most prominent ones. The big villain of the previous title, Res, the overworld of television, returns and once again takes over the media dimension, seeing that there's no one more capable of stopping him than someone who'd done it before, so you playing as Gex, are tasked with writing him once and for all. At first you refuse, cause that sweet Scraps Season 2 isn't going to binge itself, but seeing as the agents who asked you for your help decided that abduction upon such refusal is the way to go, and then showered you with tons of money and gadgets, you know, Walkmans, quad color pens and video game themed lighters, you eventually agreed to once more take down the root of all bad TV programming. Gex Enter the Gecko is a full 3D open-level platformer in vein of 3D Mario, seeing you go through various different TV series and movie-themed stages, collecting remote controls to unlock more regular, boss and secret levels and searching for Res. Gex's moveset consists of tail whipping, tail bouncing and a flying karate kick. he can also climb certain walls and ceilings, which helps a lot in some of the environmental puzzling sections. So that's not bad and a nice range of actions to perform. Most levels play exactly like 3D Mario, with Gex's moves being enough to defeat any and all enemies that he comes across, but some tougher ones may require interacting with the environment to put them down, like shooting cannons at the dragon for instance. Gex is known to spew one-liners and wisecrack jokes left and right, most of which originated from pop culture, and these are more often than not quite good and add flavor touches to this already rather enjoyable game. Presentation-wise, the levels are all interestingly designed, Gex's character is detailed and nicely animated, so nothing to complain about here, but some of the enemies could use extra few polygons to appear less blocky. It's not a game breaker in any shape or form, but just feels like an easily avoidable overlooking in an otherwise rather great game. In the grim future of 2037, when police forces have long been disassembled due to their incompetence at stopping ever-growing crime, it's down to numerous various private security companies to protect the citizens. For a fee, that is. So, if you can afford it, your life's generally speaking peaceful and idle in this future. A multinational biotech company, Syntech, secretly creates a new drug, aptly named Syn, so that no one would figure out where it came from. Game logic. And they flood the market with it, effectively monopolizing it by offering stronger sensations for a better price. You, playing as John Blade, an excellent name for the ass-kicker that you are, and working for Hardcops, one of the most well-known security companies, will have to deal with the situation and save the city from the addictive plague that the Syn is. Syn, the game, and not the drug, is a first-person perspective shooter based on the modified Quake 2 engine. While the arsenal that you'll have access to is rather standard for the genre, and one would risk saying boring, so rifles, pistols, rocket launchers and plasma rifles to name a few, and no odd weapons like freezing or shrinking rays, it all actually makes perfect sense. Because Syn, unlike most games at the time, incorporated a rather realistic damage model. So, for instance, shooting the enemy in the leg would slow them down considerably, and headshots were practically 99% of the time fatal. So, Syn replaced variety for realism. And you know what? It paid off. It was different than the spongy damage-soaking enemies I was used to and felt refreshing, even if there were no out-of-this-world guns to do so with. Syn was also the first FPS ever to feature missions catered and relying on stealth only, where your objective was to fulfill certain conditions without being noticed, and if you were detected at any point, the game would end with a failure. To add more sugar to this already sweet pie of a game, some mission outcomes could be different depending on your actions throughout them. It's not something that would surprise you today in 2024, but in 1998 it was virtually unheard of in FPSs. Let's be clear here, so we don't misunderstand each other. Syn is nowhere near as good or iconic as the FPS giants were, but it's a very fun game in its own right and one that shook the genre, proving that it could still innovate across semi-filling dozens upon dozens of different FPS games. First, Carmageddon is considered as the best game in the trilogy by the majority of all gamers, and for good reason. It was first, and in the case of a very innovative, extremely violent and bloody, previously unseen gameplay, it counts as something, a lot. And it was a rather polished game, meaning it didn't feel rushed to cash in on holiday release rush, or as if features were cut, omitted, unfinished, or generally speaking lacking direction. It was a complete package. Now, second Carmageddon, subtitled Carpocalypse Now, was more of an evolution rather than revolution. It featured hardware acceleration, support for higher resolution and color palettes, better models for the city roadside objects and cars which had their damage model completely reworked too, all to include more external visual cues corresponding to the inner state of the vehicle. Heck, given the right amount of damage, cars could be even split in half, instantly rendering them unusable. Levels, or tracks I should say really, were bigger and more varied now too, featuring more sideways, shortcuts and points of interest. And finally, all opponents' cars that you wrecked during races became purchasable after the race, provided you had enough money. Same as in original, you could try to race in Carmageddon 2, winning the race by completing a certain number of laps in time. Also, same as in the first game, I've never seen it happen, nor heard of anyone who'd done it. Most of us gamers went for the elimination of all opposing cars, which was more fun, often faster, as they were not only fighting you but each other as well, and bloodier. And back then, games that spilled hospitals worth of crimson liquids were everything, for better or worse. For me, Carmageddon 2 was a better game than the original. It had new maps, featured more cars that were deforming as much as my sanity was, so with each crash and each pedestrian driven over, and the power-ups / weapons were not only over the top, unrealistic and crazy, but most importantly so much fun to use. So I often found myself scouting for the best ones and then camping to assassinate. and then camping to assassinate any and all cars that would happen to pass me by. It was hella fun. What wasn't though were the occasional missions. They sounded like a good idea, so stuff like killing all cows, destroying all the antennas or whatever else, but in reality they were subject to a very restrictive and unforgiving timer, making them unnecessarily stressful in otherwise most of the time silly game. I still loved it, and it was my fave out of all 3 games. But it was also one that annoyed me the most too. Cyberstorm 2 Corporate Wars is a futuristic sci-fi mech strategy, and sadly not as good as its predecessor was. It's not a bad game, mind you, not the case here at all, it's just not improved enough to be a full-fledged 2. 0.5 seems more appropriate. One area it unquestionably shines in though is the customization, as it allows for a lot when it comes to making all the mechs, tanks and hovercraft your own. The 3 fundamental vehicles differing in speed and size. There's numerous chassis for each unit type, each with their own number and kind of weapon hardpoints to which this could be attached. And since there's 7 different weapons, there is a lot you could do with the units to make them your own. The pilots, so bioderms, can be customized too by setting appropriate stats for them, which are entirely dependent on your tech level and cost more the more you stat them. So, it's the right combination of units and bioderms that will win you the campaign. Cyberstorm 2 was made as a turn-based game, and it's best balanced when played like it. But if you're more of an RTS enthusiast rather than the turn-based nut, it can be switched into optional real-time mode. Although I would strongly oppose it, and not because I don't like it, which I don't, but as an addition only and not the main game's feature, it's a bit unbalanced. So if possible, resort to only using real-time for sure-thing battles to speed up the gameplay. Cyberstorm 2 takes place a long time after the events of the first one, and Cybrids, villains of the previous entry, are no longer a major threat. But when there's nothing to fight against, we usually revert to our default state and turn against each other to battle for resources, wealth or power. In this particular case, it's all 3 rolled into one. All because a mysterious jump gate appeared in the Typheus system, and all 8 major corporations want the control of it and what's behind to themselves only. And whenever you don't want to share something, you have to use force to keep it your own. And that is precisely what happened. Being human is quite difficult for me, you know. It's my first time being anything sentient too, so I have no prior experience to compare it to or draw comparisons from, but watching people fight battles for stupid, often symbolic reasons is just painful. Because I would want so much more for humanity, and yet I know deep in my heart that it's us who's gonna be the ones to doom ourselves. I mean, games I do get, it's for fun and it's mostly harmless, but we're not foreign to aggression and violence in the name of someone else's ideology in real life either, and that's kinda scary. Upon its release, First Motor Racer was the best motorcycle racing game on PC and one of the best racers overall. It didn't try to be a simulation, it placed all its bets on arcade fun and won big, both in eyes of gamers and critical acclaim. And if I was to boil it down to the most essential, then Motor Racer 2 was the same but better. Graphics engine saw few refreshes and iterative changes, there were considerably less pop-up, more detailed roadside objects, and higher frame rates to name a few. The weather conditions are varied and user configurable too, which is always fun. An addition of all new night racing mode, with all that it entails, lights flaring and such, was pretty fun. Generally speaking, Motor Racer 2 looked and played better than anything you could get at the time on any of the consoles. It features 32 race tracks for both superbike, street racing and off-road motocross, and 16 different vehicles, 8 for each kind of a race. Other than that, everything else that made the first game great was included in the second two, an uncanny and unbeatable sensation of speed was on a definite forefront of the experience. I've been talking about it for a while now, deliberately avoiding a particular subject, leaving best for the last, so to speak, namely level editor. Yep, you could make your own tracks in Motor Racer 2. Which, if you think about it, changed it from being a game with 32 of them to one with potentially unlimited number of tracks. So, near infinitely replayable one. The short of it all is that if you enjoyed arcade racers, there was hardly any better to play in 1998. Now, I'm painfully aware that whatever I will say about Grim Fandango, good or bad, I will upset someone, as it's such an iconic title that everyone and their mother has an opinion about it. And it's only natural that everyone considers theirs the only right one. Grim Fandango is obviously Tim Schafer's baby and LucasArts' first full 3D adventure. And if you don't know who Tim Schafer is, then perhaps you won't get upset with me talking about it after all. One can only hope. But, so that we're on the same level, he was the mastermind, or at least one of them, with Ron Gilbert being the other, behind some of the most well-known, beloved and historically most significant games from LucasArts. You know, the Maniac Mansions and Monkey Islands to name a few. I mean, do you really need to name any more? These were kinda like the benchmarks, and by some, yours truly included, considered benchmarks in point and clicking to this very day. Anyway, Grim Fandango takes place in the land of the dead, where deceased humans go to lead their second, dead life so to speak, before eventually dying again and turning into flowers. I know, crazy. But that life after life looks eerily similar to the original one that we all lead here. So they have careers, sleep, go on trips, fall in love and do everything that we do, just in their second, undead iteration. A graphically stylized, based on Mexican mythology and film noir captivating in its design iteration, I must add. I mean, I wouldn't say that the Grim Fandango characters are beautiful in any definition of the word, and yet you won't be able to take your eyes off them. The protagonist that we get to follow is Manuel Manny Calvera, a travel agent at the Department of Death in the city of El Marrow, where he's employed to work off his debt to the mysterious powers that be. The game is divided into 4 chapters, each of them taking place on November the 2nd, so over a span of 1 full day in the 4 consecutive years, and sees Manny go on an epic quest full of odd happenings and intrigues to uncover a corruption within his organization. Most puzzles in Grim Fandango are inventory-based, with some occasional environmental ones here and there to keep it fresh all throughout. Traditional for LucasArts' games mouse controls have been abandoned for Grim Fandango, with Manny moving by use of arrow keys and indicating points of interest to interact with by tilting his head towards them when passing by. I always found mouse controls to be the easiest to grasp and operate games with, so the change was something I needed to get used to. Eventually I did, and you will too, and the controls will begin to feel like a second nature. Also, modern Telltale games use the exact same scheme, so if you played those you'll feel right at home in Grim Fandango. You'll feel right at home in Grim Fandango. And since we're on the subject of amazing adventures, with Grim Fandango being one of them, how could I not mention Sanitarium, another of the greats of 1998. This one, however, is much more serious, dark, devoid of any humor whatsoever, and touches difficult subjects of mental health and sanity, or lack thereof really. Sanitarium is a psychological thriller point-and-click adventure, and not a light-hearted one at all, but oh so captivating that you won't be able to put it down, I promise. In Sanitarium you play as Max. Or that's what everyone seems to be calling you, at least cause you don't know your name. In fact, you don't know anything about yourself or your past. You don't even know where you are and why you're there in the first place. You may as well be Bob the Builder, who lost it after being let go from his beloved decades-long career of bobbing and building. You've really no recollection of anything at that point? Well, so that you're not at loss, let me put your mind at ease. You're in an old, rundown and clearly underfunded sanitarium of sorts, and you got there after waking from a coma caused by a terrible car accident. So there's that. Not much to go on, but a definite start. As you go through the game, you'll need to try to piece together what your life once was and figure out answers to all the questions you might have. And there's so many of these. Anyway, your investigation will see you transported mysteriously to various often otherworldly locations, like a small town inhabited only by malformed children and overseen by an alien entity known as the Mother, or a circus terrorized by the squid-like creature and surrounded by seemingly endless deep ocean, or even an alien village overrun by cybernetic insects. And that's just a few of these. The line between real and imaginary will be thin in this one, and not always clearly visible. So, where all these locations will feel anything but bright, they also appear to be very real in the same time. In fact, the whole going in and out of reality thing will be an overarching theme throughout the most of the game, as you will struggle to regain your memory and eventually unravel the truth surrounding the mysterious Dr. Morgan, the head of the asylum. The plot will take you on a trip and a half and will be filled with more than one twist before its conclusion. Sanitarium's presentation is spectacular. High-resolution, high-color graphics and over-the-head viewpoint portray the nightmare-filled locations perfectly. All the extra background and foreground details used liberally in each of the areas that you'll visit will add on to the feeling of uneasiness, being lost, nay, drowning in the sea of craziness, fighting for each little and shallow breath of normality in the otherwise hallucinations-induced dream world. As most of you know, I don't really play RTSs, but I can appreciate one if it's spectacular, unique or just worth the attention for whatever the reason, and especially if it was overlooked. And that last is precisely the case when it comes to dominant species. The game depicts the conflict between the so-called Mind Lords and the evil human invaders who appeared on Mind Lord's planet, seemingly out of nowhere and unexpectedly. While the Mind Lords have been in conflict for eons, happily engaged with each other in a never-ending war, fighting for the so-called anima, the source of all life, the arrival of humans changed the rules of engagement forever. Now, Mind Lords have to fight off this new danger rather than focus on themselves. You, my dear viewer, play as one of these mindlords. Dominant species is very similar to most other RTSs when it comes to gameplay, so you have to mine resources, expand your base and build new units. That said, it's clear from the get-go that it was made with an emphasis on combat and not base management, as these rarely ever have more than just a few buildings. But units get all the attention in the world. There's 27 kinds of these, all rather interesting looking and smoothly animated, and all clearly made for particular purposes. So, efficient, well-chosen smaller groups of units will do better against enemy forces than an army of randomly picked drones would. Units gain experience and eventually level up, becoming stronger and more deadly, which is always fun regardless of the genre, as it adds to the feeling of progression. The missions that make up the campaign are rather demanding, so even the most hardcore fans of the genre should be able to enjoy Dominant Species and its gameplay loop. Presentation is definitely game's strongest suit, with both graphics and sound design being of the highest quality for the time and very atmospheric, well fitting to the game's overarching style choice. If you're into the genre, check it out, but as someone who don't care much for RTSs, I can tell you right now that it didn't sway me to give it a prolonged testing back then and will most definitely not do it today. Heart of Darkness was supposed to be a spiritual successor to Another World, also known as Out of This World, so a cinematic action platformer with some puzzling taking place in a mysterious, stranger-than-fiction location and pitting you against the unknown alien-like enemies. And you know what? It kinda delivered. You play as Andy, a teenage boy whose dog Whiskey has been kidnapped by the unknown force while on a walk during a mysterious solar eclipse event. It doesn't take long for Andy to figure out that it was evil Master of Darkness's doing, and that to recover his pet friend he will have to travel to the very heart of darkness, to the Darklands. Now, if something like that would have happened to me, I would have never guessed that Master of Darkness was behind it. I'd have much bigger issues on my hand. First of all, where did I get the dog from in the first place, as I only have a cat? Secondly, why haven't I heard about the eclipse long beforehand, as you normally do? And finally, what or who in the hell is a Master of Darkness? Some Scandinavian death metal band perhaps? I have no way of knowing. And then, and only then, after figuring out the earlier three, I would begin considering the whole who did what and why thing. But Andy's not me, and clearly he's the brighter of us both. Heart of Darkness is a side-view cinematic experience with lots of action sequences, tons upon tons of environmental puzzling, and some genre classic platforming, jumping, ducking and shooting. All of them mixed in more or less equal measures. Same as Another World, it's entirely linear and most of the sequences can be solved and completed in only one correct way. Heart of Darkness's presentation is very colorful and, dare I say it, cheerful looking, as if it was digitized from an animated movie and not crafted pixel by pixel, but don't let your eyes fool you. Not only it's much more difficult than already rather demanding Another World was, it's also chock full of very graphic and unique to most puzzle or action sequences, graphical death scenes. Some might say that it's worth to fail in Heart of Darkness just to experience all of these gruesome animations. I wouldn't, cause I hate repeating the same game sections. But that's me, and you may be curious. Interestingly enough, upon its original release, Heart of Darkness came with a pair of 3D glasses in a box, and some scenes during gameplay allowed them to be experienced in 3D. It wasn't something that was done often, and even less rare, with such an attention to detail. Rather kid-unfriendly detail, but detail nonetheless. In short, if you don't mind the difficulty, Heart of Darkness is probably the best game in today's video. Unless you prefer FPSs then. Remember how a few minutes ago I worried about Grim Fandango? Now, think how I must feel now when Half-Life's our next game. It's great, it's incredibly important and milestone in gaming history. Everyone knows it. And yet, whatever I might say about it, someone will take offense or point out what I overlooked or failed to mention. Still, I can't just ignore it. Well, naturally it's a sci-fi themed FPS in which you assume a role of Gordon Freeman. And he's not a soldier, special units agent, spy or a hero of any kind. Well, at least not yet. He's a scientist. You know, white coat, thick glasses, notepad and a coffee in hand kind of a scientist. And you will lead him through his entirely unexpected and action-packed adventure. Adventure that he did not sign up for, and yet one he will have to survive and figure out a way out from. So, you must escape the Black Mesa research facility after it's been invaded by the unknown aliens, following a disastrous in consequences scientific experiment. Or, to be precise, following a disastrous in consequences scientific failure. Half-Life spawned into existence as an answer to FPS market being overflown by the sea of semi-shooting focused FPSs, all feeling like a carbon copies of one another and all following the same formula of getting from point A to point B over X number of levels, collecting different weapons and killing ungodly numbers of enemies, with your motivation behind it all usually being just a text prompt telling you to do so. Now, this might have been a great idea in 1993 or 1994 even, but as the years passed, not much changed and the genre began to feel stagnant. Valve thought so too, so they aimed at refreshing the entire genre. The attention was put on immersive world building, deep and engaging plot written by real-life science fiction novelist, and storytelling via in-engine scripted events, never really taking the player out of experience or control from him, as opposed to by then genre standard separate animated or pre-rendered sequences. And boy oh boy, did they hit the nail. For once, it was not about dooms or quakes. No one cared about them. Everyone was into deep and immersive Half-Life, and good, cause it was just that. But very good that is. If all that wasn't enough, Half-Life often had you figuring out small puzzles to progress, and while not mindbenders in any definition of the word, they were hardly ever just a collection of keys, and more often than not something unique, like navigating a maze of conveyor belts, using boxes to build a makeshift staircase, or figuring out a way how to use environment to kill the enemy. For instance, by using a valve to spray hot steam at the aliens. Half-Life did what it aimed for, it changed the entire genre, and for the better too. And whether you liked it or not, regardless if you cared for the genre or hated it, you cannot disagree the importance of it in the overall history of gaming. Might and Magic 6: The Mandate of Heaven is the 6th installment in the long-running first-person perspective party-based role-playing series, and the first game to take place on the same world as Heroes of Might and Magic 2 and 3, while continuing the story of the two. It featured a rather robust game world, deep and engaging but non-linear story, and user-friendly interface. Best of all, however, unlike many of the releases of the same size at the time, it was basically bug-free, which is not something that was common by 1998. In Might and Magic 6, you led a group of 4 adventurers on an epic quest to save the land of Enroth, in the process ridding it of technologically advanced aliens Kriegans and finding the missing king. The game engine from earlier games in the series found its way to where it belonged by 1998, so trash, and entered the new and shiny full 3D solution. Now, traveling the world of Might and Magic with full 360 degrees movement and not one based on an underlying grid was something else. Especially that it was a world that was most entirely open for exploration. I mean, you could have even scaled the mountains if you wanted to. Not saying that there was reason to, but if you really wanted to, you could go for it. You know, as a personal achievement or something. Combat was best in the series too, it could be played in real time or turns, with both of these having their own ups and downsides. Real time allowed for free movement on the battlefield and using of environment in your favor, or if you're me and clumsy, then against you. And turns gave you plenty enough time to carefully pick spells and attacks and direct them at your chosen enemies. What's more, the game operates under a calendar schedule, meaning that many of the events and happenings that you may encounter are limited not only to the time of the day, but also a season and a particular date in a year even. Which meant that consecutive playthroughs of Mandate of Heaven could feel considerably different when approached with different adventurers and played in different quest order. Since we're on the subject of quests, side ones, while perhaps not very numerous, were usually well thought out and detailed in their setup and not just genre basic, go to a small seaside village and kill all the orcs there, or even collect 12 blue mushrooms to create a potion of a stiff stick. While there's no races to pick from in Mandate of Heaven and all created characters are human, there are classes of Knight, Druid, Paladin, Cleric, Sorcerer and Archer to pick between, and that choice will influence everything for the entire campaign. From weapons and gear that they can use, through stats to spells and skills. Everything. Might and Magic 6 scored high with critics and gamers upon its release, and deservedly so, as it was an amazing adventure and a really well-crafted game. Yoot Tower is an unofficial sequel and a better version of original Sim Tower. It was made by the same developer, but not published by Maxis, which was a bit of a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, it gave them freedom to do whatever they wanted with the game, but on another, limited its visibility and potential reach. The goal in Yoot Tower is identical to that in original, to build as profitable tower as possible, which in turn meant expanding it considerably while balancing the development with correct usage of available transport system, so elevators, stairs and escalators. You start on an empty plot of land and must develop it into a successful and profitable venture by stacking up rooms of various kinds and functions, so shops, apartments, offices, restaurants, cinemas, convention centers, the whole shebang. Whenever a particular milestone or a task that the game requires of you to achieve is reached, a VIP will visit your tower to evaluate how you're doing. If this impression will be favorable, you will unlock a new milestone, new room and facilities, and you'll also get a bump up in the rating. And all this naturally influences your potential for future income. There are 3 kinds of elevators in the game: simple, express or service, and they all serve different purposes. Simple ones provide floor-by-floor transportation with an option of them not stopping on certain floors. Express elevators stop at 15-floor intervals, so they are great means of fast transport to cinemas, shopping malls, convention centers, you know, where you want to get fast and not disturb the regular tenants or office workers' daily rhythm. And finally, service elevators are used by stores for deliveries and general tower staff only, so security, cleaners and the likes. Most notable difference between the Youth Tower and Sim Tower, other than the numerous bug fixes, would be the inclusion of seasons, which affect both number and types of visitors throughout the year. Seems like a small change, but makes for a more enjoyable and deep experience. If you like business/managerial simulations, Youth Tower is definitely not one to skip. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six is a first-person perspective tactical shooter that moved its focus from over-the-top countless hordes of enemies killing genre standard to strategic anti-terrorist action. The game aims to be as realistic as possible, meaning that whenever any shots are fired, and it's not very often, someone usually dies after a hit or two. In fact, that very realism is what the game was known for, as it not only features true-to-life damage model, under which more often than not getting shot meant getting killed, but also offered a whole plethora of real weapons and equipment. From simple bulletproof vests, pistols, shotguns and grenades, all the way to the biosuits and specialized rifles. What's more, while the game is played in first-person view, it's hardly a hectic shoot-em-up. You lead a group of Special Forces soldiers, or a few of these groups actually, and you can plan out their approach in each mission to the very last step. So, if you really wanted to, and more importantly, knew how, you could plan out whole mission approach without ever getting to participate in it yourself, at least in theory. Rainbow Six follows a campaign built out of several missions, completing of which pushes the plot forwards and sees you performing various daring tasks, like rescuing hostages, defusing bombs, gathering intelligence, or even planting surveillance devices, to name a few. And all that using various methods, so you may as well find yourself going through a particular mission infiltration style, silently, like a shadow or an MP5 armed ninja, just to replay it the next playthrough in full frontal assault, guns blazing style, putting down enemies as soon as they enter your crosshair. That's hardly how most played it though. Successful and well thought out missions often only take just a few minutes and about 10 to 20 minutes of pre-planning, which for many FPS gamers meant that Rainbow Six was way too slow for them. Those that gave it a chance though, in grand majority loved it, and while I never completed it, I did find it to be unique and more enticing than most other run-of-the-mill shooters. Story-wise, you recruited into super special unit called Rainbow, the most elite counter-terrorism team in the world, with members from various countries, all to stop the spread of terrorism. The more missions you will go through, the more obvious it will become that there's something bigger at stake and that the fate of the entire world may lay upon your unit's performance. Shogo Mobile Armored Division is a first-person shooter that takes place in a far-off future. How far off? Hard to tell, but I can't even imagine it now, so it must be a good few decades at least. You're Sanjuro, and you're one of the commanders in the UCA, United Corporate Authority, and a pilot of a mobile combat armor, a giant mech of sorts. The UCA is at constant conflict with the so-called Fallen, a well-known and nefarious criminal organization. The war between the two has taken its toll, not only on the UCA, but on you personally too. It took your brother, best friend, and a girlfriend. And I'm sorry for that, cause that's like a deadly triple combo no one should ever have to experience the pain of. All three of them died during one of the missions a year prior, so the wound is still fresh and rather gushing. And just as you were putting it all behind, rebuilding your life back up to try to get better, you're sent on an assignment to kill Gabriel, a new leader of the Fallen. And it will stir up in your past, bringing it all back to surface once more. Such is the life of UCA soldier, I suppose. There are two kinds of levels in Shogo, those that take place in the enemy buildings and installations, and they are played with Sanjuro out of his armor, infiltrating them on foot, spreading anti-criminal healing pellets by an automatic rifle method of delivery. These are the pills that the enemies can't take on their own, and they have to be delivered at the near speed of sound directly into their bodies, preferably straight to heart or brain. There are naturally health, ammo and weapon pickups in these stages to help you keep going. The other levels take place outside, mainly in the cities, and see Sanjuro in one of 4 available mechs, each with their own characteristics, strong and weak sides. The movement here is basically identical to that inside of the building, it's just the scale of things that change as you're in a huge mech. These mechs can transform into vehicles for faster movement, like some kind of a budget transformers, but are unable to defend themselves when they do, so keep that in mind. Outside stages are much better designed, often with fun and unique mechanics to them. For instance, in one of them you have to run around jumping from skyscraper to skyscraper, all the while annihilating the oncoming enemy forces. Most of the story is entirely linear, with no way for you to influence its run in any way whatsoever, but at one point you will be asked to make a decision. It only happens once, but that choice will influence the rest of the game and the ending, so make sure not to miss it. The gameplay itself is hyper-fast and action-packed, with enemies often ganging up on you, and uses one of the early real-time hit area detection systems, meaning where you actually hit the enemy will be reflected in their behavior and mobility. Shogo is surprisingly fun and worth a playthrough even today. Dark Vengeance is a third-person perspective fantasy hack-and-slash game, very similar in its mechanics to much more famous, well-known and better Tomb Raider. An evil empire has arisen from the dead. Yup, it's one of those not really zombie but still quite undead type of situations here, so gather your crucifixes, your holy water, and even some garlic for good measure, and get ready for anything. The fourth coming of the dead was foretold by the permanent solar eclipse caused by a powerful evil spell. In its wake, the Dark Elves are set to return and take over the land of Amiga. Usually it would have been a problem, but since it's you who's on the case, we can just relax and let let you take the steering wheel and restore the sunlight to the kingdom. Dark Vengeance features 3 different characters to play as: Nanok the Gladiator, Jethro the Warlock, or Kite the Trickster. And not only they look, feel and play entirely unique to one another, but also have different motivations to why they're on this world-saving quest in the first place. So, the choice of a character will change their available movesets as much as which of the 18 levels they will have access to, as some are created for certain characters only. You can carry up to 9 weapons, each of them having their own special kind of damage, abilities and 3 unique attacks. Most puzzles are environmental and require you to either figure out where to open which door or to find keys or levers that are hidden away somewhere. These are not in the forefront of gameplay, so their simplicity is not an issue really. What is though, and completely overshadows really nice graphics and sound design, are the clunky controls, especially those related to camera movement and combat. They require you to often press and or hold a combination of keys to pull off some moves, which is anything but ergonomic. Also, you'll get stuck, often, in walls, in objects, in the floor, everywhere. Mostly unexpectedly and for no reason. As you can see, Dark Vengeance is rather buggy, and playing it will feel at times like playing Ghostbusters from a perspective of a ghost that failed halfway through moving in the wall and just froze inside. It's not a terrible game, not the case here, and there's a lot to like in it, but there's just so much that it does wrong that it's difficult to enjoy it in the long run. Outlaw Racers is a very unique game. It had quite a few neat ideas that were not always well implemented. Nevertheless, it deserves being remembered. Not sure if it's worth replaying though. In fact, it's a lot like an average movie that you're fine watching once and appreciating for what it was all about and how it told its story, but then never craving to rewatch it ever again. The races take place in the cities and are for the most part checkpoint based, meaning you have to drive through all of them for money and to win. But funny enough, the gimmick is that you don't have to go for the nearest checkpoint first and face a strong competition for it, you may as well start with the last or any of the middle ones. The important thing is that you go through all of them. What's more, there's caps. And yes, since it's a racer, you will break the law by driving too fast or on the wrong side of the road. And they will chase you. If you let them catch you, cause you're you, and if you wouldn't just let them, they'd never stood a chance of doing so on their own, they will fine you and the money will be subtracted from your budget. Money is awarded by getting to the flags first or bumping into cash trucks. Yeah, you'll know them when you see them, don't worry, they stick out. The biggest and most unique feature of the Outlaw Racers though are the cities, which are entirely random generated, meaning that no tracks are ever the same and no two racers would follow the same path. If you're done with a particular city, you may look for a hyper-transport system that for a small fee will generate a new city for you to race around in. You can buy new cars or upgrade the existing one, but since the upgrade system is quite simplistic, more often than not it's easier and better to just get a new one. If you can afford it, that is. While quite fun, Outlaw Racers never really managed to gain a huge traction and remained a rather little known and obscure game. While being the third game in the series, Return to Krondor is actually a direct sequel to the first and a third-person perspective fantasy turn-based role-playing. You're once again in the world of Midkemia, and once again it is in danger. Once a thief, now Squire of Krondor, James, along with William Condoin, a fearless swordsman and a couple of other braves, have to follow the trail of a ruthless mercenary named Bear, to stop him before he finds and takes the Tear of the Gods for himself, a mysterious and powerful artifact that could change the world for the worse forever. Yup, the keyword here is wars. Oh well, such is medieval fantasy magical life, it seems. As they go about that challenging but oh so glorious quest, they realize along the way that wherever they go, horrible dark beings and perversions of nature are present there already. And there's something a mere mercenary, even one as evil as Bear, couldn't have caused all by himself. Krondor itself, it seems, must be rotting from within with corruption. Unlike its predecessors, Return to Krondor is much less focused on exploration and freedom of movement, offering smaller and more confined areas. Especially that large chunk of the game takes place in the city of Krondor, in many of its districts. While it's impossible to travel the overworld anymore, later on in the game you will be able to visit some out-of-the-city areas via quests that you'll acquire for them. And since we're on the subject, while there's only one main quest that will take you through the entire adventure, there are numerous side tasks that you may perform too. The leveling up system in Return to Krondor is more similar to other RPGs of the era rather than previous entries in the series, allowing you to allocate points to weapon proficiencies, defense, spellcasting and the likes by hand. There's also alchemy potions brewing, lockpicking minigame and encumbrance system which affects your mobility. The magic and melee are nicely balanced and a well-rounded party can quickly become the force of nature the enemies should fear. I feel that Return to Krondor is the weakest out of all games in the series, and featuring no emotional story and a very straightforward twistless plot, it's not something that will keep you on the edge of your seat while playing. The House of the Dead originated in the arcades and it's one of the very best on-rail shooters ever made. Also, one with the most stupid story that you've ever heard. Not that the story is important at all in the shooters. So get that. Your girlfriend Sarah leaves you a message on your answering machine telling you that she's been captured by a bad guy called Curian. Now, imagine how nice of a kidnapper that dude had to be not only to let her call you, but also tell you what happened and who he is. What a stand-up guy. A gentleman and a scholar. Now, you being a staff and as courageous as you are, decide to follow the crumbles, or whole cookie pieces I should say really, as you know exactly who to look for, and get Sarah back. As the game begins, it becomes clear that the title was not lost on it, and that while you're after Sarah, who you'll be fighting to get to her are not Curian's goons, but in the grand majority the undead. As in zombies, you know, the brain-hungry, animalistic, devoid of anything human monstrosities. House of the Dead is composed out of 4 stages, each of which ends with a boss fight. For the first 3 you get a clear rundown of what their weak spots are, the last however you have to figure it out all by yourself. Now, even if most on-rail shooters can be, let's say, powered through quickly and accurately downing enemies as soon as they pop up, in House of the Dead you have to be careful while shooting not to hit the innocents, as shooting a civilian will cost you a life. That said, same as all the others in the genre, it's basically a memorization game. So the sooner you remember where enemies pop up from and in what order, the sooner you'll be able to breeze through the stages. Even if a bit difficult at first, it's one of those titles that when repeated often enough, in time it will offer close to no challenge whatsoever. So, if you're a fan of all the Virtua Cop games, House of the Dead is basically the same, but better, so you'll no doubt enjoy getting lost in its arcade decapitations and blood-filled gameplay loop. Rayman Forever is a compilation release that brought the amazing original game to new heights, by releasing Rayman along with 24 completely new levels made by the devs, 40 best ones made by the fan community and submitted to the Ubisoft's website, and the so-called Rayman Designer, level editor that could extend the life of the game quite considerably, allowing you to create your own levels too. What is Rayman though? Well, it's a proof that PC could pull off platformers as good, if not better than those found on consoles. Running super smoothly, encompassed in rich colorful backgrounds and melodic music, with excellent sounds and intricate, perfectly thought out level design. And all that with ease no less, and not too demanding on the hardware. Rayman is a classic story of good versus evil, so Rayman versus Mr. Dark respectively, and it's an action platformer featuring our unusual hero. One that does not have arms or legs, but has hands and feet despite that. Weird. How are they connected to his body? Nobody knows. But my best bet is on hopes, dreams and imagination. A mixture of all 3 in equal measures, keeping those extremities close, even if not directly connected. Aside from standard running and jumping found in other platformers, Rayman can also hover for a short while using his hair as a propeller and throw his fist in an attack. And yes, I meant what I said, throw, so that they could return to him like some kind of a hand boomerang. They can be wound-up too for a more powerful punch, like a knockout strong one. In the end, Rayman is the best of the best the system could do when it came to action platforming, a benchmark for 2D action platformers for years to come, and an incredibly fun and easy to pick up title that I believe everyone should try, as it's the best example of what PC was capable of if given a chance and some talent thrown at it. Also, it's as good today as it was years ago. The Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard is third-person perspective action-adventure set in Bethesda's world of Tamriel. Redguard takes place around 400 years before the events of the Arena, first in the Elder Scrolls mainline games, and thus is a prequel to all the other games in the series. And unlike most Bethesda's games of the time, it's not an RPG and only has few small bits and pieces inspired by them, namely quests and money management. Other than that, it's a 3D arcade adventure, placing you in the shoes of Cyrus, a Redguard mercenary and a well-known hero, who has to travel to the port city of Strossemkai in Hammerfell and investigate his sister Izara's mysterious disappearance. As you do just that, you'll soon realize that there's much bigger and sinister political intrigue at play, and it will require solving too. The game is rather open, allowing you to free roam its many areas and tackle quests in a non-linear fashion. Plot may demand completion of certain quests and acquiring of specific items to push forward most of the time, but occasionally a conversation prompt with a correct character may be needed for progress too. Naturally, as in most action-adventure games, Redguard's full of it, so action and adventuring. No shit, Sherlock. And that action bit of it is pretty straightforward, composed mainly of slashing, stabbing, and even some simple combos dependent on the key's input combinations and active blocking. So, putting enemies and monsters down left and right as necessary is what you'll be doing all the time, cutting through ocean worth of enemies, all the while looking for your sister. Adventuring, however, consists of rather robust conversation trees and puzzling. And while first are self-explanatory, the puzzles are all different and can be inventory, mechanical or logic-based. Some of them being mandatory, others optional side ones. Interestingly enough, these optional puzzles are often more fun than the ones that you have to complete to progress. If you're looking for an RPG experience when playing Redguard, you'll be disappointed. There's no attributes, no real feeling of a character progression, and nothing that would make it even remotely feel like a true RPG. But if you just wanna have fun, and like Tomb Raider adjacent titles, then you may have a blast here. Fallout 2 is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi role-playing and a sequel to year prior's first Fallout. Also one of my most beloved games of all time. Why? Oh, my dear Watson, it's rather elementary. It's just the best. Simple as that. It takes place in 2241, 80 years after the events of the first game and 164 years after the Atomic War, which reduced majority of the world to the shadow of its former self. To irradiated wasteland that can support close to no life, be it fauna or flora. This time, however, you do not hail from the vault, but are the chosen one. No, not Neo from the Matrix, someone much less complex. A tribal villager from Arroyo, who happens to be a grandchild of a hero from the first game, and the first person that somehow managed to survive and complete the village's Temple of Trials. In the first game, you were searching for a water chip. In second, funny enough, quite early in your adventure, you'll find whole pallets worth of these, just lying around gathering dust. This time, you're looking for love, and in all the wrong places, I must add. Wait a minute, I must have mixed up all my scripts. Give me a sec. It's gotta be here somewhere. Yeah, I got it. See, I knew you were looking for something tech-related, and it's a GECK, as in Garden of Eden Creation Kit. A pre-war vault tech that allows for turning even entirely dead soil into one that will be able to sustain life for years to come. Your as funny as dark adventure will take you through most of West Coast US. You'll meet many of its factions and tons of incredibly interesting characters, eventually leaving your undeniable mark not only on all of them individually, but also on the history of the region and future of soon-to-be reborn America. Your character is built out of 6 special attributes, so strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility and luck. And what's so special about them? Well, fans of the series will get that silly little joke of mine. Anyway, each of the attributes corresponds directly to one of many different skills, divided into 3 groups of combat, active and passive. And this can be stuff like small or big guns, unarmed combat, sneak, lockpick, first aid, stealing, repair, speech, outdoorsman, and many more. And all of them, every single one of them, works, is called upon numerous times throughout each game and is very, very important. Best of all, it's virtually impossible to create a character that's a master of all, so each playthrough with a different build may feel and play out entirely unique. I mean, in one game you may be a huge mountain of muscles that takes all the enemies head-on, either with his fists or melee weapons, bludgeoning them into a bloody pulp, while in another you may opt out to be a sniper. Heck, you may complete the entire game never taking a single shot or throwing a punch if you'd like to. Sure, it will require a bit of mental gymnastics and a couple of daring escapes, but it's possible. A pacifist run, can you imagine? Also, having your intelligence at highest rating will often allow you to access extra dialogue options, and on the flip side, having it as low as possible changes all the dialogues in the entire game to near incomprehensible mumble, as you'll literally be playing someone so mentally incapable that they're not only having problem understanding what others are saying, but also even expressing their own thoughts. So someone like me. And "Migo, you look bad, angry, I run, now" is not something out of ordinary if you go down that route. Effectively a grown-up infant. Now, does that sound interesting to you? Well, I haven't even licked the oh-so-sweet surface of this tasty candy of a game. There are numerous factions in Fallout 2, all with their own agendas, schemes and goals. They may cooperate, they may compete against each other, and each of them forms their own opinion about you based on your actions. The creatures that survived, or evolved, or mutated, or arrived to populate the world of Fallout are all hella interesting too. And stuff like two-headed Brahmin, huge geckos, or even ghouls and super mutants will be the least unusual ones of them all, trust me. Fallout 2 is a game that cannot be spoken about in a way that would explain everything that it's all about. At least, not in a video like this one. It has to be experienced. Preferably in series of playthroughs with differently built characters, all aiming to have the wasteland recall their influence and importance in its history differently. Oh, also, Fallout 2 taught me what kind of a job Fluffer does. And it was not something I ever expected to learn from the game. Or at all, really. So yeah, there's that too. If you get a chance, drop everything else and play it. Lode Runner 2 recreates the classic platformer in 3D, only not really 3D. It is however viewed from an isometric perspective and allows for movement in all three directions, so it kinda sorta also is. I know, I'm confusing you, but trust me, I'm confusing myself too. This time you can control both a male and female character, so Jack and Jane respectively, and other than the gender, they don't differ at all and have the exact same characteristics and capabilities. Unlike most other remakes of classic arcade puzzlers, however, Lode Runner 2 takes full advantage of that third axis and is actually really fun to play. It's all about collecting all the gold in each of the stages, all the while avoiding constantly chasing you evil monks. And as per usual, you can dig to platform your way around the stages or to trap those pesky monks. There's three kinds of these: purple, blue and black. First loves ripe plums, second appreciates staring at the sky and imagining that the clouds take forms of various everyday items, and the last is a priest, a satanic priest at that. And once again, I've mixed up my scripts. Someone's gonna have to take responsibility for all these mistakes at some point, and it sure as hell is not going to be me. I wish Batman was here. He was always an exceptional scapegoat. Anyway, as I was saying, there are three kinds of monks, and they really are of these three aforementioned colors. Colors that mean something completely different though. Blue monks are blind and always follow a particular preset pattern of movement, a path if you will, so if you keep out of their way, they're not that dangerous. The purple monks, which are most similar to those found in the original, so they chase you and generally speaking try to act in a surprising and unpredictable manner. And finally, black monks are like the purple, but much smarter. They will chase you no matter what. They will try to lock you in and circle you if possible, and outsmarting them in some of those more difficult stages may not be as easy as one would like. There are naturally bombs and various other power-ups in the game, and while I will let you discover them on your own, I'll give you a single hint. If you get a chance to grab a beach ball power-up, do it. Don't think twice of it, and in the words of one of the 20th century's most brilliant philosopher, Lord Byron Michael Bartholomew Nike III, just do it. It's gonna be a blasphemy, but I was not a fan of Tomb Raider 3. In fact, I was not a fan of any Tomb Raider apart from the first two, until they were remade from ground up as Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadow of the Tomb Raider in the late 2010s. So yeah, I completely overlooked 15 years worth of games in the series. But it doesn't mean that there was anything wrong with Tomb Raider 3. Quite the contrary. The third and most others were rather fun and easily better than the first two, both technically and presentation-wise. So why did I only give them a passing interest and never completed any of them? Well, I think the charm of the never-before-seen quote-unquote new that struck me with the first two was long gone with the others, and I was more into different kinds of games back then. As a result of that, I had no place in my gaming life for more Tomb Raiding then. I've since saw most of these that I missed, but given how incredibly good the new trilogy was, I was not going to be completing the old ones anytime soon. Anyway, naturally, as per usual, in Tomb Raider 3 you're playing as Lara Croft, the second sexiest video game heroine ever. First, naturally being Miss Pac-Man. She had that X factor that no other female video game protagonist had since. Even jiggle physics-friendly Miss Croft. Anyway, in this one, Lara has to travel to India in search of the legendary stone that once belonged to the tribe of Infada. Shortly after doing so, because of course that she managed to recover it as fast as it takes a magician to take a rabbit out of his hat, she is met by Dr. Willard, a head of a mysterious organization known only as RX-Tech. He tells our boobalicious protagonist that she has 3 more of these to find to complete the set of 4, and that having all would help her uncover the secret of the long-lost Polynesian civilization that worshipped the meteorite that the stones are made out of. Tomb Raider 3, same as the ones before and after, is a full 3D action-adventure platformer with a lot of puzzle solving. Granted, most of the time rather simple puzzling, but puzzling nonetheless. Lara still can run, jump, dive, swim, climb, roll, crouch, crawl, sprint, swing on bars and vines, and naturally, and most of all, pew her way out of any and all dangers using various different weapons. You know, pistols, shotguns, harpoons, Uzis and more. Stuff that every modern, self-respecting adventuring lady should master the use of. Interestingly enough, Tomb Raider 3 allowed for tackling of levels other than the introductory first in any order, making it one of the few non-linear games in the long-running series. Heretic 2 is a dark fantasy third-person action adventure and a direct follow-up to the first Heretic. It changed its viewpoint from the first person to third, which caused quite a controversy upon its release, as fans of the previous games were not happy about it. Ultimately, I think that the change was for the best, but I wasn't getting into it expecting anything, so I had no reason for disappointment either. What's worth pointing out though, is that despite this new perspective, use of environmental puzzling and platforming is heavily limited, same way it usually is in first-person games. So the opportunity was a bit wasted on Heretic 2. Anyway, you play as Corvus again, and after returning home from banishment, you realize that the mysterious plague has befallen upon the land of Partoris, taking the sanity of those that it didn't straight up kill. And getting back home to the town of Silver Spring is even more painful as you're greeted with the brutal attack by the infected. Somehow, probably using Jedi mind tricks, you manage to escape, but not before you're infected yourself too. Fortunately, because you hold one of the tomes of power, the infection is not as instant and devastating as on the rest of the populace. You are far from immune though, and only more resistant and capable of withstanding its effects for longer. So now, despite earning a well-deserved rest in earlier games, being the hero saving the day more than once, you must once more embark on an epic quest to find the cure before you succumb to the effects of the plague. And I gotta tell you that if you're not someone who disregarded Heretic 2 because of its viewpoint change, you're gonna have a lot of fun. You'll be going through the city, swamps, jungle palace, desert canyon, insect hive and network of deep underground mines, all the way to the castle resting atop of a high mountain. There you will find both the source of the plague and the one responsible, and also learn of your indirect involvement in the infection's creation. Most weapons that you'll use fighting with a wide plethora of various enemies are ranged and spells, and while these bodies will not come at you in legions, you'll have your hands full most of the time throughout the game. Heretic 2 is fun and a worthy addition to the already hits-packed 1998. Sega Touring Car Championship is the third Sega's foray into PC racing market. First was with stock cars, second with rally ones, and now, well, touring. All originated in the arcades and all are rather decent and fun ports to PC. All also seem very similar, and if they didn't support different titles, I'd be hard pressed spotting the difference, seeing that all of them are really just glorified arcade racers. Now, don't get this wrong, I like them, all of them in fact, touring being no exception from that. But by 1998 saying that Sega Touring Car Championship was unspectacular was an understatement. By then we had Screamer 2 and both Motor Racer games, so an old arcade port that might have been perhaps impressive couple years earlier was looking blunt, simplistic and too late to the party to get a drink, put in an awkward position of having to walk around it, scouting for abandoned red solo cups with leftovers in them, grabbing them and downing whatever it could just to get that little buzz going. And I don't have to tell you that mixing alcohol rarely ends well. Anyway, Too Little Too Late Sega Touring featured 4 tracks only, which compared to what was on the PC market at the same time seemed very limiting. And get this, also 4 cars. Same issue here. That said, these at least for Sega were finally actually real-life cars, so Alfa Romeo 155 V6 Ti, Toyota Supra GT, AMG Mercedes C-Class and Opel Calibra V6. The game features 2 modes, Original Arcade, which runs exactly like it did in the arcades and is de facto for better or worse authentic arcade experience, and PC mode, which is similar but allows use of tweaked cars and is not constrained by the timer. It also splits in Championship, Time Attack and 2-player split screen, which I have to say is the best thing in the entire game and definitely most fun. To summarize, Sega Touring Car Championship is not a bad game, it's exactly what it was in the arcades, but in 1998 it was not only a bit too late, but also not what PC players wanted either. We craved addicting gameplay and a lot of features, the more the better, which in terms of racers meant either tracks or cars or graphics, preferably all 3 at once. Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit is arguably the best out of 3 Need for Speed games. Not my favorite, but I will not dispute the claim as it's objectively correct. It wasn't groundbreaking in any way as compared to the earlier 2, but it iterated on everything they did well and added few interesting features to boot, making for an ultimate racing experience that was actually still by then very honest to its own title. It features classic to the series single race and tournament and 2 new modes of Knockout and Hot Pursuit. Each of these offers its own rewards for completion. For instance, Tournament unlocks few extra cars, while Knockout on Expert difficulty unlocks both cars and a bonus track. While it's not my favorite way of obtaining content, I kinda get why it's done like it. It's an incentive for the player to try and beat all of the game modes. I'm not gonna cover the obvious two ones, but the knockout mode sees you racing through all the tracks, with last place driver being knocked out after each race is completed and only remaining ones progressing further. And it carries on like that until there is a single definitive winner. In Hot Pursuit mode, you must outrun the cops through fast open area track, all the while outlasting the other racers. The game comes with 13 cars split into 3 classes of A, B and C, more or less describing the power levels of vehicles that belong to them. There's also 8 standard and a single bonus track included. In reality, however, if you take a closer look at them, you'll realize that the 8 is a bit inflated number, as it's just 4 tracks that fork at some point and change very little. I mean, sure, it provides for partially different racing experience, but it's not an entirely unique one, which is a bit disappointing. Well, at least you get to pick whether to race on them during the day or at night, and weather conditions. You can also fine-tune the engine turning, brake balance, steering speed, gear ratios, suspension stiffness, aerodynamics and tires. It's a new one for the series and actually makes a difference while racing, both when you do or do not know what you're doing. So it can help you or make the car behave worse too. Presentation-wise, if you had a 3D accelerator when Need for Speed 3 came out, it looked fantastic. Not only everything was smoothed out and popping in color, but also ran super fast and featured tons of little special effects like rain, pellets and snow, all looking phenomenal. Oh, and I failed to mention it before, but you can also take on the radar, so to speak, and play as a cop, chasing and pulling over speedsters. It's fun. KKND2 Crossfire is a sci-fi post-apocalyptic real-time strategy and a game that I've never played myself. So, everything I'll tell you about it will be based on what's available on it online. I don't dig RTSs, and by 1998 there were so many amazing games in other genres that even checking them out felt like a time wasted. To me, and I'm different. Anyway, the game takes place 40 years after the events of its predecessor, and to the two sides of survivors and evolved, a third faction was added. Series 9 Agricultural Robots. And no, I shit you not here, they did evolve or reprogram themselves actually after the war for caring for the crops to destruction of all human life. Some would consider it an ultimate and inevitable evolution progress for AI. I call it a glitch in the matrix. Neither is a problem until we face it in real life. Anyway, 2 or 3, for the most part, all sides play more or less the same. There are 3 map types in the game, barren desert, forest and urban jungles, and all are entirely uniquely looking and feeling from one another and are depicted in nice, well-designed detail. The objective naturally is to be the last faction standing, and it's done by means of strong and deadly military, supported by a correct and efficient resource management and maintaining of your base operations. Let's not kid ourselves though, you mainly win through pew-pewing all the enemies. Other than the attack units, you can also raise turrets to defend your bases, and it's good to keep the potential enemy attacks in mind when building them and place them next to easily defensible locations. Campaign sees you going through series of missions for each of the factions and provides de facto story of how the conflict progresses, so it should be your go-to upon starting the game first. There's also multiplayer, so theoretically infinitely replayable mode, but if I'm to be honest, I'm not sure if a game as old as this one could even still be played online today. Hard to tell. KKND2's presentation, while sadly not utilizing more and more popular at the time 3D, is rather decent, with all the units beautifully recreated and animated in pixels and overall feeling well-fitting to the world the game takes place in. AI, while heavily advertised on the gamebox, is something I can't give you the exact rundown of, as I've seen mixed reports, with some claiming that it's rather decent, often probing players' defenses before mounting an attack and working as a team rather than the individual units, while others said that it's so bad that even the correct and efficient pathfinding is an issue for it. All in all, if you liked RTSs, it's definitely one to try. At the time of its release, Just Jackrabbit 2 was the best PC 2D platform shooter and a much better game than its already rather stellar predecessor. Story-wise, as Jazz was about to marry his girlfriend Eva Irlong, pretty cool name I must add, his arch-nemesis, because every hero needs one, Devon Shell, the turtle, stole Jazz's wedding ring. And if you think that that's nefarious, you're wrong, cause the ring is just a part of Devon's much more evil plan. He intends to use it in his time machine to go back in time, kill Jazz's parents and thus preventing Jazz from ever being born. Pretty dark for as colorful game as this one, isn't it? If that wasn't enough, both Jazz and his best man, his brother Spaz, are locked up in a dungeon by Eva's demon of a mother. Well, I'm exaggerating, there's only one demon and it's my boss's wife, but Eva's mother is a close second. Now you, playing as Jazz or Spaz, or both for that matter with a friend, have to retrieve the ring and deal with Divan once and for all. The gameplay is more or less identical to that in the predecessor, but presented in juicy high resolution and super smoothly animated and scrolling. Both of the characters are tad different in how they work, so Jazz, same as before, can glide down using his ears and jumps higher. And Spaz has a karate kick and stomp jump that allows him to stomp and open crates containing power-ups. The levels are much bigger, better designed, and also feature areas accessible by just one of the brothers to encourage a cooperative play. They are quite varied in their presentation too, taking you through underwater tunnels, thick jungle, medieval castle, alien landscapes and many more. While you start with a standard blaster, naturally there are extra pickups in form of more powerful ammunition for it, and this can be a flamethrower ammo, freezing or even exploding one among others. You'll stumble upon some coins along your adventures, and this can be used at the merchant for him to teleport you to a secret area full of goodies and power-ups. Other than the fantastic single player and co-op, Jazz features a very fun multiplayer mode in which up to 32 players can compete against each other online. Or could, cause I have no idea if the service is still working. Overall, from a pure fun factor point of view, Jazz Jackrabbit 2 is probably the best game in today's video. Police Quest SWAT 2 is a real-time tactics video game viewed from a top-down isometric perspective. It features two campaigns, one for LAPD SWAT site and the other for the Five Eyes criminal organization. While the sites are symmetrical and don't really have any upper hands when compared to each other, they use different equipment and weapons. Each mission that you partake in your chosen campaign has its own objectives that need to be fulfilled, and you will have to get your head going to manage to do so. SWAT site has to save as many civilians as possible, preferably arresting suspects rather than killing, and following rules of engagement. While Five Eyes can pretty much go to town on both civilians and the police, with little to no consequences to their actions, spreading death and destruction all around. Units can be gathered into color-coded groups for easier multiple tactical management. Each of the units, be it SWAT or criminals, is described by the two categories. Marksmanship, responsible for precisely what you think it is, and less obvious one, cross-training, which basically corresponds to equipment and utility proficiency. SWAT site also has a certification attribute, which for all intents and purposes is a specialization descriptor indicating if particular unit has any special skills. So they can be an element leader, with said element being a single color-coded squad, sniper, usually a dude pew-pewing with sharpshooting accuracy, explosives, which is pretty self-explanatory, EMT, a modern life cleric, saving lives left and right like a true hero that he is, and finally K9, capable of leading dogs. Each of the specializations has its own unique and very useful skills. Sniper, for instance, can reveal any part of the map within their line of sight. While SWAT 2's presentation may have not shaken the world in 1998, especially when compared to games like Rainbow Six, which offered similar gameplay idea but in full 3D and from first-person perspective, its high-resolution top-down view graphics are rather nice and clear, so you'll never feel as if the interface or presentation got in the way of playing. If you dabble in real-time tactics games, there's hardly any better than SWAT, especially that it allows you to sample its gameplay from the perspective of both sides of the conflict, with each playing entirely different. Monster Truck Madness 2 is a successor to 1996's first game and basically the same title, just slightly facelifted to the 1998 standards. It's so similar in fact that even the engine between the two does not differ considerably, and special additional tracks from either could be used in both games. So yeah, in reality it was more like Monster Truck Madness 1.5 rather than 2.0. It doesn't change the fact that it's as fun as the first game was, and if you're someone who likes monster trucks, then by 1998 there was no better game out there tackling the niche subject. What made it especially popular among gamers was an addition of famous at the time real-life trucks. Bigfoot, Gravedigger and Carolina Crusher among others, and online multiplayer mode. So, what makes Monster Truck Madness 2 better than the first one other than the licensed cars and that refreshed presentation? Well, more cars and more trucks, and a bit improved already pretty decent physics. Nothing more really. And while for some it may not warrant a purchase, fans of the sport no doubt gobbled the game like a Cookie Monster going to town on his chocolate chip cookies. Personally, I don't care much for it, but I've only seen monster trucks once or twice in real life and was already over the age of getting overhyped by them, so the appeal was definitely lost on me. Quest for Glory 5 Dragonfire, same as its predecessors, is a point-and-click adventure and role-playing mixture viewed from an adventure game perspective, and the last title in the long-running series of games. Unlike previous games in the series, combat takes place on the same screens as exploration and is action-based, feeling more like a hack-and-slash than a tactical battle. Weapons and armor management play much bigger part too, leaning the title more towards the RPG sides of things. Silmaria's king has been recently murdered in mysterious circumstances, so our hero, that you will bravely lead with your mouse, charm and wit, along with wizard Erasmus, travel there to take part in traditional rites of rulership, which award the crown to the winner. Naturally, you enter contest because being a king is better than not being the king. Also, fresh sheets every night, good food, rivers of wine and a royal jester are values that speak to you loudly. As the competition progresses, it becomes painfully clear that some odd forces are at play, as other contestants are being systematically killed off by an unknown assassin. What's most unusual about it is that all the victims are murdered near the dragon pillars that keep the dragon of Silmaria in captivity. Being the world's greatest detective, yes, twice, cause Batman is just greatest once, and you're at least worth a double of one-man bat, you take it upon yourself to get to the heart of the thing, solve the blood-soaked riddle, find the responsible party and save the kingdom from potentially devastating danger. You can either create a hero that's a thief, wizard or a fighter, same as in earlier games, or import one used in previous series entry. The game world of Dragonfire is ginormous and filled with dozens of interesting characters, shops and side quests, most of which don't really have to be taken or completed. It's totally up to you what you go after and what you ignore, other than the main quest, that is. While Dragonfire is no doubt one of the best entries in the series gameplay-wise, if you're someone who enjoys the suspense and want a long work towards uncovering the secret, you'll be a bit disappointed. The murderer is revealed quite quickly, which is a bit of a letdown if you ask me. Redline Racer was not Moto Racer. And while that may not mean anything to some not versed with the series, it means that it was not the best arcade motorbike racer upon its release. Nothing more. It doesn't mean that it was a bad or disappointing game, only that there was something considerably better, the best even in the arcade racing genre. Still, Redline Racer offered a pretty decent driving physics, 10 different and really fun to race around tracks in 6 unique locations, and a plethora of multiplayer options, which may not be as important today, as I'm not sure if any of them work anymore. Oh, and 8 different bikes. Yeah, that's important too. Additionally, the sensation of speed is not lost on Redline Racer, and you can practically feel all the roadside objects swooshing past you at breakneck speeds. Even more so when you come to an instant stop by crashing on the side of the road or with another racer. And you will, as mastering the game will take a little while, and CPU-controlled drivers are definitely nothing to scoff at, and will actively try to push you off the road if given a chance. And since there's always 15 of them, the chances will be aplenty and they will try to take them. You can pretty much take it to the bank. Redline Racer's presentation is pretty good in terms of both sound design and graphics, and while it may have nothing on Moto Racer 2, it's still rather nice. At the velocity that you'll be speeding around the tracks, it's unlikely that you'll be pondering about the complexity and details of smudges that you'll be passing by anyway. I keep comparing Redline Racer to Moto Racer, pointing out the superiority of the latter, but believe it or not, there's one thing that the Redline Racer is better at. And it's the realistic depiction of how difficult it is to control a motorbike at these incredible speeds. I mean, I know it's supposed to be an arcade racer, and realism is not what most gamers seek in these, but here you go. If you're one that does, Redline Racer is seemingly pretty accurate at that. Soldiers at War is a superior sequel to Wages of War and a turn-based squad tactical strategy that I've never played. And the more I read and learn about it, the more I feel that I've missed something special and worth experiencing. Especially that it looks a lot like ground combat in my beloved Xcom games. Anyway, Soldiers at War takes place during World War II and places you on the Allies' side of conflict, performing various missions against the Axis. And if you wonder why I deliberately avoided the N-word here and T-word when talking about SWAT 2, it's all thanks to YouTube's algorithm that buries the videos using them, even briefly. Now that I think what I said, I think it may have came up wrong. I naturally did not mean any slurs when the N or T words were mentioned, but the real-life words that are just a big no-no for the YouTube overlords. Anyway, unlike XCOM, there's no overarching strategic or management layer in the game, and you're just going through a series of tactical encounters trying to complete the campaign. To do so, you have a pool of 32 men, 8 of whom you can pick for any of the missions, and a plethora of various weapons, some of which are rather limited in number. That said, certain weapons can be recovered during missions, so it's not as bad as it could have been. You'll come across stuff like pistols, knives, semi-auto rifles, bolt-action guns, machine guns, bazookas, flamethrowers, sniper rifles, and numerous explosives among others. So when it comes to equipment, variety will not be an issue. Interestingly enough, other than the standard for the genre mechanics, you've few unique ones, like picking up wounded to take them to safety, using radio to call for support, and reinforcements arriving late mid-battle to name a few. Your soldiers have various abilities, they gain experience and grow between the missions, but can also get wounded, making them unavailable for a while, or even killed. All that makes for a rather fresh feeling and action-packed gameplay, if that makes sense even when talking about turn-based title. The only bad thing I found repeated about the Soldiers at War, basically everywhere I looked, were the interface and controls, both apparently being clunky and not user-friendly, requiring time to get used to, and overall feeling as if they itself were 5 years older than the game was. Now, I've not had a chance of confirming or denying it myself, but I've added Soldiers at War to my to-play when I win the lottery list of games, so hopefully I'll get to sample it at some point in the future. Urban Assault is a 3D real-time strategy and a first-person perspective shooter. Yup, at once. Sorta. It's an oddball of a mix, but a fun one, if you're into at least one of the two genres it's made out of, that is. Anyway, the game starts a few years after a nuclear holocaust that left humanity weak, damaged and shaken. Seeing the state of things, two rivaling alien races jumped on a chance to take advantage of the situation and grab the planet for themselves. Well, not to keep, nothing of the sorts. I mean, in large parts it was a nuclear wasteland by then. They only wanted to drain it out of all the resources and then abandon, same way a 16th century noble would leave his bastard of a child without a single tear spilled, coming back home from years of warmongering and spreading his seeds in all villages along the way. So, like a used and dirty good-for-nothing rag. And since humans are humans and will always be just that, they are split into many conflicting factions too, fighting with invaders as much as with each other. All of the sites available to pick in the game have their own and unique units, naturally with their own distinctive feel and capabilities. Urban Assault makes you feel like a part of a real huge war, with conflicts often having dozens if not hundreds of units engaged at once in different parts of the map, fighting in numerous individual battles for survival and resources. Later on, that is, cause initially the game allows you to get used to its formula, gradually increasing the scale and difficulty. Gameplay itself is pretty cool too, mixing RTS squad management with single-player single-vehicle shooting. Because yes, you guessed it right, you can pretty much take control of any of the units in your army, which is rather fun. And good, cause it will quickly become more than obvious that your performance playing as different units can make a monumental difference in the outcomes of the battles. All because while the AI is rather good, it's the enemy AI that is. Friendly AI is straight up trash. Anyway, Urban Assault is hardly the first game to mix these two particular genres, and definitely not the best one. But it's very good nonetheless, and if you enjoy sci-fi strategies and shooters, it may be your next fave retro game, even if for just a couple of weeks. Civilization 2 Multiplayer Gold Edition is basically standard Civ 2, but with both of its expansions included and a multiplayer mode, which as we know today is the only really correct and most fun way of enjoying the title. Civ 2 MGE, as I will be calling it from now on, was my favorite outing in the series until the release of Civ 4, and a turn-based 4X strategy. So, extremely exciting extra experiment, as in social and military experiment. Hold on a sec, I think I've mixed up my scripts up here a little. Dang it, I did. Turns out that's 4E and not 4X. 4X that the Civ is stands for Explore, Expand, Exploit and Exterminate. Not the same things, I'm afraid. Anyway, same as in any other Civ to date, you pick a nation to lead and then take it through its whole recorded history from 2000 BC all the way to the near future. Sadly, in this early outing in the series, the differences between those nations are not as prominent and game-changing as they began being in later titles. But it's not something that ever detracted me or anyone else I know from playing, as back then we didn't know any better. The rest of the country management / expansion gameplay is rather solid. So, your typical city building and then detailed management is nothing out of ordinary, and you have to make sure to keep the cities growing, sustainable and outputting plenty enough civilian and military units to improve your country at a steady pace, and be able to defend yourself or wage wars to grab more land, more resources and more cities. Yep, the theme here is more. It always is in Civ games. So yeah, Civ 2 MGE is same as Civ 1, but better and with those extra multiplayer options, which are quite extensive too. You can set up a game over LAN, pretty standard fare, nothing new here. Then there's the play by email mode included. And I know that it sounds crazy today, but it was so fun back then, you could have like 20 games running all at once and only spend like half an hour daily playing. And finally, my most favorite, Hot Seat Multiplayer, the mode in which I happen to play Civ to this very day, albeit in its modern iteration. While Civ 2 MGE was made with gaming with others in mind, it's basically the original with its expansion packs, so enjoying it on your own is not only possible, but also great, and trying out its included scenarios or even dabbling in creating your own with built-in editor prolonged its replayability considerably. There was hardly any other better nation-leading game in 1998 for turn-based lovers, so if you were one, Civ 2 MGE was a treat like no other. Sadly, Test Drive 5 is basically Test Drive 4, just tiny bit better, which says a lot when compared to other racing games on the market that dropped in 1998. Test Drive 4 wasn't great when it released, and 5 just follows suit. And my biggest gripe with it is that the controls are not great. You don't feel the weight of the vehicle, so to speak, the sensation of speed is very artificial and doesn't feel realistic at all, there are dozens of invisible walls and no damage model. Handling is not great too, but that's to be expected in mid-90s Test Drive games, they were kinda known for it. So is it really trash? No, it's not, it's just not great. That said, some things it actually does pretty well, like variety. If you compare it to the Need for Speed 3, arguably a much better playing game, and just put side to side what they offer in terms of anything but fun, then on paper, Test Drive 5 should be better. It features 28 mostly real-life vehicles, both old and new, and each of them feels unique. Still broken, but definitely different from one another. Also 17 tracks, all set in and around real-life locations all around the world. So, San Francisco, Moscow, Edinburgh, Sydney and many more are where you'll be racing. They are perhaps not set on real-life roads, but the backdrops, buildings and roadside objects are all unique and thematically fitting, so they're all rather fun to experience. If you haven't played Test Drive 4, that is. Because if you have, you'll immediately realize that many of the tracks have been ported from it with hardly any extra work done on them. Which is a bit disappointing, especially for all the 11 remaining fans of the series that were still faithful to it throughout those dry years. Few of the tracks have branching routes on them, adding a bit to the variety, but these are usually short and nothing special. Police chase mode is just an afterthought when looked up close, as compared to that used in Need for Speed it looks poor, with just one squad car chasing you, hardly posing a challenge or adding to the difficulty. To summarize, Test Drive 5 is not a good game. It's not unplayable either, it just is. And if you had nothing else in 98, it was definitely capable of providing racing variety for a little while. But compared to anything else in the genre at the time, it was just poor in fun. Lords of Magic Special Edition is a base title coupled with its later expansion and an excellent fantasy strategy game in its own right. The land of Uruk is torn in war between 8 nations, all supporting a different region, different set of beliefs and values. One of the nation's leaders, Lord of Death Balkov, is bent on destroying others, all in the name of his dark deity, God Golgoth. And since his fanatism spreads over his entire country like a cancerous plague devouring any free minds there, he is known to be the most dangerous out of them all. The other factions have no other choice but to expand their armies and prepare for the encounter with the Mad Balkov. Lords of Magic combines turn-based exploration and resource management with real-time combat and does it in one of the most engaging and surprisingly fun ways. If you like difficult and long-lasting games, that is. Thus it's not unusual in LOM to spend few hours just setting up during early game turns for the long and difficult battles to literally span over dozens of long hours after. If you're not picking any of the fast scenarios, the game of LOM can easily take 40 to 70 hours. But if you're a fan of a genre, you won't feel that time at all, having fun all the way through. You can pick one of the opposing two Balkov nations to play as, and each of them feels distinct and has its own specific units. These units are led by a hero that represents your champion, and this champion can be a warrior, thief or a mage. And as per usual when there are classes, these two represent their expected advantages and quirks. So, a mage is very class canony, but can lay terrible destruction with his devastating spells, the warrior is excellent at combat, and while it sounds boring when spoken about, cannot be ignored in the field of the battle, and finally thief can sabotage enemy armies to weaken them so that it's easier for you to overcome them, or more difficult for them to put you in your place, cause yeah, that's possible too. LOM's fantasy strategy marrying with simple RPG elements turned out to be a happy coupling that not only works great as a package, but is also very fun to experience, so make sure not to skip it if you're into the genre. By 1998, we really didn't need another generic feeling RTS, and Tribal Rage is most definitely not one. If anything, it's one of the most unique takes on the genre that I've seen. It's still a genre that I care very little for, let's make that clear, but at least it's unlike anything else. It takes place in a dark futuristic version of Earth in the currently not so far off future of 2030. The Earth was decimated by natural catastrophes, wars and drained of its formerly rich resource pools. Humanity is in constant conflict and more reminiscent of the world of Mad Max than our own. Well, less desert-like but brutal, animalistic and tribal in its social divide. So, survivors formed clans and tribes to stay safe and to keep fighting for the remnants of what the planet still had to offer. You can take control of one of these clans to lead it to the ultimate post-apocalyptic victory. The choice here is not only varied, but also rather interesting. So you have bikers. They're the closest thing in-game to Fallout's raiders, so dangerous, aggressive and all about killings and pillaging. Not always in this particular order. Then there are Amazons, female barbarians of the game, strong, courageous, capable of converting, wink wink nudge nudge, women from other tribes onto their side and riding on dinosaurs' backs. Don't ask, I know, crazy. We're gonna have dinos here in 6 years and people don't talk about it. It's ridiculous. The cyborgs are your Robocop wannabes. Part human, part machine, all the way destruction and demolition. And no part law and order. Enforcers? Now these are semi-civilized folks. Semi. Mainly former cops and soldiers, they know how to use all weapons and have the best. They want the laws to be respected and followed. Thing is though, it's their laws. Trailer trash is kinda self-explanatory, not much changed between now and then, so they're pretty much what you expect them to be. Death cultists are the end-of-the-world believers, and as most religious fanatics, they base most, if not all of their decisions on blind faith and not facts or logic. Very, very dangerous because of that. Civilians? That's you and I, friend, perhaps not the most strong faction of them all, but definitely one of the most, well, humane. While many of the techs are rather generic and available to all of these groups, each of them have their own unique ones and unit types too. What's more, the customizability of said units is rather unparalleled, allowing you to build them to your specifications, exchanging available modules based on the tech that you have researched. Modules comprise of weapons and equipment and are really fun addition to the already rather one-of-a-kind gameplay loop, as they allow for crafting of really unusual strategies suited to counter that of your virtual or real-life opponents would use against you. Research itself is probably the weakest part of the entire game, as it takes no time at all and just makes you pay for the technology. If you think about it though, it's an RTS, so who would have wanted to wait for the tech to be available? Anyway, I'm not gonna lie to you, Tribal Rage is definitely not the best RTS that you've played, probably not even in the top 5, but it's one of the most creative takes on the genre. Well worth a look. Show me a bad Star Wars game and I'll give you, I don't know, let's pick something reasonable. A car maybe? A house? No. Oh, I know, it will be thematically suiting too. Maybe a toy lightsaber. You know what? Come to think of it, I made no one, so no, you're not getting any of these. I'll give you a virtual high five. How does that sound? It's probably worth more than all of these. I mean, I am a future traveling multimillionaire extraordinaire. And all I really need to get there is those millions. Multiples of them, naturally. So you know, I'm like halfway there, cause knowing is half of the battle or whatever. Anyway, Rogue Squadron 3D is the first game in the series and an arcade action shooter. What made it stick out as compared to earlier games like X-Wing or TIE Fighter was its easygoing approach to gameplay. Rogue Squadron didn't pretend to be a simulation to be serious about the struggle with the Empire. No, it was an arcade shooter, it knew that it was, and it placed all of its bets on the fun factor. And boy oh boy, did it win big. Take it from me, so someone who's not a huge fan of the movies. You play as Luke Skywalker, and in this particular game, your Jedi skills are virtually irrelevant. Your piloting, though, is stuff of legends, and precisely what you'll be doing. And all the freaking time at that, cause you're a commander of an elite rogue squadron, which you'll lead through 16 missions against the evil Galactic Empire. While most of what you'll be doing is pew-pewing enemies into a rain of debris and series of fireworks, your missions will actually have objectives, and these are rather fun too. So search and destroy, reconnaissance, rescue and protect. And I could try to explain them here, but naming is so obvious that it would be a dishonor to your intelligence if I did, my dear viewer. And dishonor like that is punishable by years of toilet cleaning on a flagship Imperial Starcruiser. And stormtroopers don't fool around on chilly Tuesdays and curry Thursdays. I mean, the concentration of methane in breathable air on these particular days on a Starcruiser can be much higher than on some of the smaller planets in the galaxy throughout the entire year. Breathable air, that's a joke. Let's say that everyone knows that using matches is prohibited on the Empire's ships. Anyway, you'll have access to 5 unique crafts throughout the campaign, each with its own armament as well as varying speeds and maneuverability. Let's make things clear. Rogue Squadron 3D is an action game through and through, and all it really cares for is fast, frantic action, plenty of targets for you to remove from this plane of reality, and beautifully rendered zooming around the space and planet's vehicles. There's a story, sure, and it's canon, sure, but will you be paying attention to it? I doubt it. But if you enjoy arcade titles, it's probably the best one in this entire video. Heroes of Might and Magic 2 Gold is a follow-up and a much better game than the earlier Heroes of Might and Magic, and secondly, it's my most favorite outing in the whole series. Not only because it improves on everything the first one did, but also because it comes along with its huge-ass expansion pack. It's a fantasy strategy game with some role-playing elements that, while offering a campaign, is, was and will be best played in hot seat multiplayer against other people. The game sees you and your heroes fighting for a control of a particular map in turn-based gameplay, capturing and expanding cities, resource production locations like mines, mills and the likes, and building your armies to face the fantasy world it is set in. The game features 6 different heroes: Knight, Barbarian, Sorceress, Warlock, Wizard and Necromancer, and each of them is described by series of 4 basic and 8 secondary stats. The secondary ones being trainable in 3 proficiency levels from basic through advanced to expert. Each of the heroes feels and plays different, and the corresponding castles are unique too, not only offering their own class-specific buildings, but also completely different and upgradable units. The map has many more features as well. Most prominent of them are the teleports, that work as, well, teleports, allowing you to cover large distances in an instant. I mean, if a barbarian wants a pot noodle soup, and he's in a castle in the middle of a dense forest, he will get that pot noodle soup, okay? That's what the teleporters are for. Everyone knows you don't toy with barbarians' hunger. Everything about Heroes 2 is grander and better. Combat screens are bigger and have their terrain features that cannot be passed by creatures other than the flying ones. Overworld maps can be huge now too, and compared to the previous game, they are gigantic. And last but not least, magic is not based on memorization of spells, but spell points or mana, whichever name you prefer. Heroes can cast as many magic spells as they like on an overworld map, as long as they have enough mana to do so. And 1 spell per turn in combat is also limited by the blue mouthwash. Other than that, it's the same game. Better game, but same. Most swear that Heroes of Might and Magic 3 was the best out of them all, but I always found Heroes 2, and especially with its amazing price of loyalty expansion included in this gold package, to be the most fun to play. It added tons of maps and new campaigns, few extra cool things like eye towers or blocking stones to name a few. Elementals, yep, elementals, and the most interesting and useful creature dwelling in the entire game, the Barrow Mount. It allowed for recruiting of ghosts, one of the best units in the entire series. They are far from being the strongest, fastest or most resistant. In fact, they sit somewhere in the middle stat-wise, but have an uncanny ability to increase their unit number by defeating the enemies. So they were best utilized against large groups of very weak enemies first, to boost up their numbers considerably, feeding on the weak, which promptly increased their importance on the battlefield, with each next attack and combat encounter. If cultivated properly, they can quickly grow into thousands and become the most dangerous unit in the game. Oh, there's a built-in map editor too, and it's so good. Easy to use and features rather fun scripting tools letting you craft really cool scenarios. I love Heroes of Might and Magic 2, and Gold version is an ultimate package and a must-have masterpiece in my eyes. Sure, objectively speaking Heroes 3 was better, but to me, nothing could compare to the second. Oddworld Apes Exodus is a successor to year prior's Apes Odyssey, and still a flip-screen action puzzle platformer. Interestingly enough, despite there being 5 of these in the series, this second is the only one considered to be a spin-off and not a part of the main run. I'd say odd, but that would make it weirdly fitting. Anyway, the story is a direct follow-up to the first and sees you playing as Ape, still trying to free your fellow Mudcons from the evil Glacons. Aliens that treat Mudcons like a delicacy and devour them while still fresh. So I heard. I have no proof of that. Can anyone please show me any proof of that? Or is it a conspiracy spread by Mudcons trying to frame the innocent Glacons for crimes that never took place? It's not, I'm sorry, I got carried away. Gameplay is basically the same as before, so each of the levels is composed out of numerous screens and filled with tons of small environmental puzzles that will require solving. So you'll be using your skill of possession, controlling minecarts, activating and deactivating of objects, pulling levers like a maniac, using rogues, grenades, bombs and many more, in various often unusual and ending in a funny resolution ways. You can also creep, walk, run, roll, hoist, jump and crouch, and this will be your main tools of survival when escaping the ever-hungry Glacons. Oh, and you'll die a lot, because of course that the game is as punishing as the first one was, and hoping to be able to always run away is a rather naive notion. Apes Exodus was considered an amazing title by gamers and the press alike, and became a beloved title on both PlayStation and PC. I never liked it, but I sucked at it, so that may be the reason. Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate is an isometric top-down turn-based squad-centric tactical strategy, translating the tabletop original onto a digital video game medium, and a mouthful like no other. Probably more mouthful than anything else. It is set in a titular 40k universe and depicts a squad, or squads really, of ultramarines led by courageous Captain Kruger through a tense and epic campaign against the perilous and traitorous forces of chaos. While the 15 missions strong campaign is the main dish of this tasty treat of a game, it also comes with few as appetizing sides, namely series of single missions, random mission generator, a very accessible scenario builder and even a dessert in the form of multiplayer support. So it's a full 5-course meal if you will, that will leave you full and satisfied if you like turn-based tactics games or the Warhammer 40k. Combat plays out in turns, during which all of your units can perform as many actions as they'd like, or as you'd like them to, cause you're the brain behind this entire campaign, as long as they have action points to do so. So they can move, fire weapons, or throw a grenade. It may not sound like a lot when put like that, but if you keep in mind that there's dozens of available equipment for your troops, and that proper gearing up for each mission and picking the right squads is a must for a chance of success, you will not get bored playing the game. Space Marines naturally gain experience and can improve their stats as they participate in the missions. They can also be assigned to either a general purpose squad or one of 3 specialized ones: So Assault, Devastator and Terminator, which are amazing names for 1980s sci-fi action movies. Oh wait, I think I've heard of one. Anyway, extra weapons can be found during the run of your campaign, and in the latter missions you'll even get access to some vehicles, so there's always something in Chaos Gate keeping it fresh feeling. Naturally, there's simple morale system too, and it works same as in original, so try to avoid being burned alive by a flamethrower or have too many of your men fall if you can, as the rest may lose their will to fight. To summarize, if you're a fan of a tabletop classic, Chaos Gate is a no-brainer. And if you're not, or never played it, it may still be worth a try, as it's as fun to someone who has no intimate knowledge in the lore. Take it from me, I know of it from video games only. The stupid-ass named The X-Files game, as if we didn't know it was one, and it was a surprise for us when we made the purchase, is a rather decent first-person perspective point-and-click interactive movie type of an adventure game. All the main characters from the series are not only played by the same actors, but are done with no less flair than they were in the series. And take that sentence how you'd like, I know that while X-Files was universally loved, there were these who hated it too. Story is set somewhere in the middle of the series' 3rd season, and Fox Mulder and Dana Scully disappeared on one of their missions. Oh no, not Fox and Dana, I mean, who's going to uncover all them terrible government secrets and alien activities? Who's gonna talk to Assistant Director Walter Skinner? And who will never get to learn of a man with a chronic cough? Well, simply put, you will, or won't, depending which question we're answering here. But all that after you complete the game by finding our 2 heroes. You're Special Agent Craig Wilmore, and while you may not be new to the whole agent thing, you're definitely new to your special agent for the FBI working on unimaginable cases thing. The game starts with you having just one lead, and that being of our dynamic duo's last location, Everett, Washington. And that's where you need to head off, gearing up before naturally, to follow the trail of crumbs and solve the mystery before it's too late. Many FMV games are garbage, but this one isn't. It's well, okay, it's okay. The story, while not groundbreaking in any way, will keep you involved and entertained all throughout, especially that it's very otherworldly as expected, because you'll do a lot of detective, or should I say FBI investigator work along the way, and that the decisions you'll make on your mission will end up setting up the ending, because of course there are multiple endings and some are worse than others. So, if you're a fan of the series, I have no doubt that you'll love it. But if you're not, then even despite its rather decent visuals and video quality, there are many better FMV games out there. Like, a lot better. So make your own mind about it. ODT Escape or Die Trying is the feeling that I get overwhelmed with whenever my boss's wife comes to work. I mean, you never know when she's gonna spontaneously self-combust, burning anything and anyone around her in her fits of misplaced evil anger and misdirected hate. Our today's ODT is an action arcade shooter with some role-playing elements. And while it sounds seriously complicated when put like that, think of ODT as of Tomb Raider, but with considerably less boobs, more crazy and weird enemies, and a lot of action. The story of the game is appropriately otherworldly too. The airship Naughty Flyus, which is the second model of the craft, first being the infamous Naughty Crashes, piloted by the worldwide famous Captain Lamad, and carrying a super rare, unique and immensely powerful green pearl to the city of Kalai in hope of curing it from the epidemic using Pearl's magic, crash lands into the so-called Forbidden Zone it flew over. Now, no zone, region or area gets a name like that without a good reason. And there most definitely was one, because as soon as the Naughty Flyus turned into Naughty Destroyus, both Captain Lamad and the Pearl were abducted from the wreck by unknown mutants. The 4 remaining crew members have no other choice than to muster their courage and head off through the dangerous lands to the very heart of the Forbidden Zone to save their captain and recover the Green Pearl. The 4 heroes, one of each you get to pick to play as, are the cartographer Julia, the strategist Ike, the engineer Max, and the least fitting out of them all on an adventure like this one, the Archbishop Solar, or the Archbishop Solar, armed with a Bible and uncomfortable desires. And also because every ship has to have one. It's like an unwritten rule of the skies. Ask your local ship captain if you have to. Anyway, each of the characters have their own strength, weaknesses and / unique skills. It's worth noting that there are 3 extra unlocked characters available in the game and they're usable in subsequent playthroughs. The gameplay mainly comprises of running, jumping and platforming around various unique 3D environments, solving occasional puzzles and defeating what feels like hundreds of enemies. The game is split into 7 larger levels divided up to 10 smaller sections each. Enemies are rather varied and uniquely designed, so you can expect to fight against different robots, mutant piranhas out of all things, and a whole manner of weird and unexpected creatures really, and even large bosses from time to time. These will require learning their patterns, but are a nice change of pace and quite fun to beat. All defeated enemies award experience points, which can be used to raise one of the 3 stats on your chosen character: strength, resistance to magic or weapon skill. And since we're on the subject, you start with bare fists and will to kick ass, which is not a lot, but also not nothing. But get to find up to 4 new weapons per character, and these are generally speaking much stronger than your punches. ODT is pretty fun and definitely worth revisiting if you're into its genre. Space Bunnies Must Die has one of the most fun video game titles to date. And also, it's accurate, because Space Bunnies must die. Everyone knows that. It's a third-person action adventure, not unlike Tomb Raider or ODT, so you can expect a lot of running and jumping, some climbing and environmental puzzles here and there, and a lot of shooting. In fact, mostly shooting. But such is the genre and it's fun this way. Unlike the aforementioned titles though, SBMD, which abbreviated like that sounds like a development disorder or an STD, sees you going into the levels from a central hub and often having to acquire an object in one stage to then use it to solve a puzzle in completely different one. So it's a bit less linear than expected, but also a lot more confusing. The trade-off here is very personal. Some won't mind it, others will get lost and /or annoyed often. Anyway, in SBMD you play as Alison Huckster, a cheeky and playful truck stop waitress and a rodeo performer. Yup, you did not miss here, that's precisely what I said. Your sister has been kidnapped by the evil space bunnies and you must now go through numerous levels to save her. And in the process, save the Earth too. You know, a double win. Given who you play as and against whom, you can bet your ass that SBMD is full of trashy humor, goofy design and silliness of various kinds. Sadly though, it doesn't always land, feeling a bit forced from time to time. Kinda like my jokes do. That said, all the shooting is rather fun, so if you're into that only, you won't get disappointed. Interestingly enough, Alison has a very special move, unseen in most other games, a dance, which entices surrounding opponents to do the same, leaving them open for her attacks. SBMD failed commercially, with reported sales for the year being in under 3,000. Part of the reason may have been numerous other beta games in the genre that released in the same time, and part multitude of glitches, some of which were game-breaking. Hard to tell. What we do know though is that its successor, Space Puppies Must Say Bye Bye, which was supposed to follow Trixie Longlegs, a pole dancer by night and private investigator by day, with bubblegum addiction to boot, was cancelled. Now, you've no way of proving that I lied here and that such a game was never to be. So please, don't try to look it up, just trust me. I don't lie like at least 5-10% of the time. You know, I barely stopped myself from saying that it's difficult to make a bad pinball game, but then I remembered that it's really not and there's plenty of trash ones out there. As game intros go, this one's not the best, but I can at least assure you that 3D Ultra NASCAR Pinball is not of the kind and not trash in any sense of the word. In fact, following Sierra's other games in the genre, it's rather fun and unique. What's so special about it then? Well, for one, you play as one of real-life NASCAR drivers, which may not really change much, but is a nice touch. And secondly, each quote-unquote race you partake in is split into 3 parts, each represented with its own unique table. One for the race preparation and checks, one for the race itself, and one for the pit stops. So, you play on the preparation table first, amassing points and unlocking bonuses, to jump later into the speedway table twice, once for the qualification round, and finally to race. Your points from the preparation along with the qualifications put together decide on your starting location for the race. Fun, right? I mean, we've seen minigames on dot matrix displays, we've seen side tables before too, but very rarely the mechanics between the tables are so deeply intertwined. When racing, you're naturally competing against other drivers, mainly by scoring points by hitting certain table elements as fast and accurate as possible. Entering pit stops happens whenever you hit an accident spot or periodically during the racing. NASCAR Pinball may not be the best looking, sounding, or, dare I say it, even the best playing pinball out there. But its ingenious design, stellar presentation and very original idea keep it fun all throughout, and all fans of the genre should make sure to give it a go, as it will not disappoint. Mad Trucks is a futuristic sci-fi arcade racer with weapons. The idea behind it is that simple. There's 8 different vehicles, 10 unique trucks in various teams, and a whole lot of fun to be had either against the CPU opponent or a friend in split-screen mode. As in most racers, first to come across the finish line wins. But unlike most, there are weapons and power-ups too, and these bad boys can make or break the game. Speed boost and shields are nothing special, you've seen them in other games. First pushes you to ungodly speeds and second protects you from the enemy fire. Missiles and lasers, however, are your main articles of destruction, and learning fast how to utilize them may be the best means of winning races. If you add mines to it, which you can poop out every time someone gets close and tries to overtake you, you'll end up with fast and frantic action to keep you busy for a little while. Now, all that said, Mad Trucks fails to reach its potential by betting on the average. It doesn't innovate at all and just repeats what other games did earlier and better. So, the trucks, while set in desert, ice and city environments, don't feel very unique, they hardly have any shortcuts or interesting features, and won't even require you braking like ever. You can literally just park a brick on an arrow up button and focus on using power-ups and weapons, and you'll do nearly as good as you would if you were really playing. And worst of all, the cars, while differently spec'd, look similar and don't feel distinctive from one another while driving. In short, Mad Trucks feels very generic, and while it's not bad per se, especially that it looks really nice for the time, if you have access to Roll Cage, Motorhead or Wipeout, you'll do better playing one of these. Would it be a cop-out if I just said that Railroad Tycoon 2 is same as 1 but newer and better? It would? Oh man. Okay, let me think. So, Railroad Tycoon 2 is a real-time business simulation, a follow-up to Sid Meier's original, and it covers a large chunk of railroad history. The goal of the game is pretty straightforward: to get as much money as possible in any way possible. So given the type of the game and its subject, it will mostly come down to building train stations, laying of rail tracks, and purchasing of trains and cars. But owning all of these and doing nothing is not a recipe for success, cause it's like having a pizzeria fully staffed and stocked up and keeping it closed. So, naturally, you gotta sell those pizzas. I mean, transport passengers and goods. And you do just that. You pick cargo and stations, set up routes and see the money flowing, in big grey bags with huge dollar signs imprinted on sides. Only not really, cause your delivery revenue varies by time, distance, demand, type of cargo, economic environment, station improvements and difficulty level. And if you think I'm done listing the factors that influence it, you're in the wrong, buddy or gal. I'm fine with you being either, whatever. You're wrong, that's the point I'm making here. Cause rival companies and numerous random events like train breakdowns, robbers, economic swings and scripted events influence your income considerably too. So, more often than not, the imaginary big grey money bags may end up being just a few coins in change. Especially that each transport also has its own expenses, so fuel, truck, engine maintenance, salaries and overheads. The biggest money is naturally in complete chains of production, rather than singular transport routes. So you're bound to earn much more if you, for instance, transport coal and iron from the respective mines to the steel mill, and then that steel to sell it, rather than by covering just one of these transports. And there's a lot of these industry combos in the game, all worth seeking out and all differently profitable depending on the in-game date, economic situation and what your opponents are doing. All locomotives and cars are naturally different in their stats and change with ages, so keeping a fleet well maintained and replacing older models for the new ones when possible and profitable is a key to success. The game is built around 18 missions strong campaign, which gradually introduces new elements and trains, providing nice challenge at a steady pace. There are also single scenarios, many of which can be played in sandbox mode. In short, if you like business simulations, especially those focusing on transport, or played Transport Tycoon to death, Railroad Tycoon may be a nice change of setting and a fresh take on the formula, especially that it features built-in map and scenario editor, prolonging its stay considerably. Rage of Mages is a fantasy action RPG using very RTS adjacent controls and viewpoint. It features no deep or meaningful dialogues, no impactful choices and no real avenues for role-playing though, focusing mainly on the combat and adventuring part of it, which while not the worst thing in the world, in 1998 was rather disappointing. The overarching story tells a tale of a group of adventurers seeking a magical weapon that could be used to break the cycle of war plaguing the Kanya Empire. Now, as grandiose or epic it sounds, it's actually largely unimportant, as the game just sends you on a series of different missions, usually one per map, and they can range quite a lot in their objectives. so you'll be rescuing captives, escorting important characters, exterminating groups of enemies of different size, and even treasure hunting among others. At the game start you're tasked with creation of your character, and it can be either male or female, and a warrior or a mage. Your main party will consist up to 4 characters overall, which you'll get to meet along the way, but there will also be other temporary companions that will join you from time to time, and hirelings for those more demanding missions. Each of the characters has their own skills, disciplines, and weapon and spell proficiencies, and is described by 4 general attributes: body, agility, spirit and mind. Rage of Mages, to me at least, was very disappointing. The story was of no importance at all, and what we knew of it wasn't very detailed and interesting, and generally speaking, the game felt more like a top-down dungeon crawler than a full-fledged RPG, and a dungeon crawler devoid of dungeons at that. I know that many people swear by Rage of Mages and love it, and I get that. It just doesn't land for me at all. But what I do actually think is important about it is that it, along with its successor, were the basis for a much later Allot's MMORPG that, while not great either, was really decent and a pretty good time waster for the few years that it was popular for. The Creed is a rather buggy sci-fi cyberpunk action-adventure. It's not a good sign when in the first sentence I have to mention that the game is buggy, is it? Anyway, the game is much more heavy on the action side of things, with adventure elements used sporadically perhaps, but at least throughout the entire playthrough. When you crash on the planet Outpost 4, you're left with no other choice than to fend for yourself. Fortunately, or unfortunately, you land near the Cerberus city, a nest of crime, murder and corruption on the planet. Since there's no other option really and you just crashed there, it's the only place for you to try to stand on your feet. You can play as either Jean Matrix, once a commander of an elite strike force now renegade and hired assassin, or as Guy Wolf, highly honored ex-cop who eventually gave up the career to become a bounty hunter. The city is run by 3 factions, the government, the Brotherhood and the Order, and you'll be fulfilling many missions for them, most of them action-packed and quite fun. There's approximately 90 missions per faction and they're organized in a branching tree where you're given up to 3 to choose from at any given point. A series of few missions may be parts of a singular larger chain, and when that happens the Creed feels really fun as it radiates that feeling of continuity and not just being a series of unrelated to each other random tasks. When you begin working for one of the factions, it's the only one you'll have to stick to the very end. And that, mixed with the branching approach to the missions, guarantees a very high replayability for the Creed, as you may not only work for 3 different factions at each playthrough, but also partake in completely unique missions if you make the right choices for the same group. Now, naturally, you're probably wondering what am I on about when I started with you crash landing on a planet and then got on to happily working for one of the big 3. Well, your ultimate goal and motivation is to save up enough money to leave the godforsaken planet and get back to your former life. The story in Creed is not greatly fleshed out, but the action sequences and generally speaking fun missions more than make up for it. Even if, despite their supposed variety, for the most part they all nearly always come down to killing anything you're set against. The Creed is dark, moody, gory and full of bugs. The graphical glitches are not uncommon, and the further you get in the game the more often they pop up, and while these are annoying, freezes is what ultimately breaks the game for me. Especially that they don't really happen in a predictable manner, so you never know when you may lose a lot of your progress. The Creed had a potential, and lost it, on a premature release. Name of your sex tape. It could have been a much better game, if it gotten an extra month or 2 of playtesting before being released. Ultimate Race Pro is a rather fun and beautiful, even if not overly saturated with features, racer. It was originally spawned as a PowerVR graphics accelerator capabilities show-off, and it truly was a magnificent view for the time, running at extreme detail, at full speed and in full screen. Eventually, support for 3D effects and direct 3D was baked in, and the game became playable on all sorts of systems. While there's 16 different cars to choose from, each with their own unique driving characteristics and performance, or described by the attributes of top speed, acceleration, grip and armor out of all things, the game features only 4 tracks, which feels a bit lackluster as compared to what was on the market at the time. I mean, sure, there's an additional training course, but that's hardly enough for 1998. That said, it makes up for it a bit with customizability, and aforementioned attributes can be modified to your heart's content. So for instance, you can sacrifice one of them to raise another, to preset the particular car to your liking, and these changes actually make a huge difference while racing. Such modifications weren't perhaps anything new, but they were usually a domain of serious simulations, and Ultimate Race Pro is an arcade racer through and through. There's 4 different weather conditions that you can race in, and while they're capable of keeping the game fresh for a little longer and look stunning, they're not enough to make up for the lack of variety in tracks. The transitions between different weathers are very nicely done though, and overall the presentation that the game offers is probably the best that we could hope for in 1998. Easily a step above the most popular games of the time. But same as in all genres, in Racing 2, it's the gameplay and not presentation that can make or break the game. And fortunately, in URP, there's heaps of it in multiplayer. The computer opponents come in 3 difficulty levels and are rather decent, and the online multiplayer allows for even up to 16 players competing at once. Chances of that happening today in a game as old as this one are rather slim. I seriously doubt that the service supporting it is still on, but it was definitely something in the 90s. Interestingly enough, multiplayer games also feature so-called Ultimate Arena mode, which for all intents and purposes was a mixture of arena fighting distraction derby games, and is all about destroying all other opponents' cars in a circular stage while keeping you in the race, so to speak, as there's no racing involved. The second, aptly named Rabbit game mode, places one racer as the chasee and the others as chasers that need to catch him, and while it's less flashy than the arena, it's even more fun. In the end, Ultimate Race Pro is, or rather was, a true ultimate show-off of graphical quality and multiplayer fun. But in single player, the narrow choice when it comes to tracks and abundance of racers on the market makes it a title that doesn't shine as much when compared to the competition. Evil Core: The Fallen Cities is a third-person perspective sci-fi action shooter. It takes place, and brace yourself here, in the year 20,000 AD, when humans have long moved from planet Earth and are now occupying the lush and picturesque planet Malia. The planet is split into 2 definite and different parts. First being the so-called Old Sector, composed mainly of caves, mines, temples and ancient ruins known as the Fallen Cities. And the New Sector, which is where most humans live. It's technologically advanced, features numerous labs, nuclear power plants and space stations. 3 very distinctive cultures live in the New Sector. Bloblix, a rather simple and not overly advanced faction that just started arming itself for the purpose of defense. The Enlef, who are torn by the never-ending civil war, and the Marks, the most advanced of them all, sporting a huge as genetically modified army and tons of chemical weapons. And they want to take over the planet. As the mysterious attacks strike innocent cities around the planet, the Bloblix Enlef ally to defend themselves from the still unknown enemy. You play as Vane Plague, an ultra-skilled, super-duper cool and fabulous mustache-sporting fighter pilot. Imagine Tom Cruise in Top Gun, add mustache and flair, and you're nearly there. And you're sent to scout the area to figure out what happened. As you go about doing that, you'll discover the real culprits, and from then onward will be sent on series of missions to save the 2 races and protect them from the impending doom of the technologically more advanced and better armed oppressor. The game will take you through large cities, tunnel networks, large industrial complexes and other interestingly designed locations fighting for the future of mankind. Evil Core allows for 2 players to play in a co-op campaign, which is definitely the best way of experiencing it. Because while you alone are obviously more than enough to save the day, because you're you, so great obviously, the 2 of you means that you can probably pull it off before dinner, which would free up your whole evening. Anyway, as you complete the objectives that you're given and earn money, you naturally need to upgrade your ship to stay a powerful enough force to stop the overwhelming onslaught of the enemies. Sure, it could be argued that you're as deadly in a ship with a blaster as you are barefoot with a clover leaf and a bag of limes, but not everyone's you. So all the others watching the video should remember to invest in better weapons. Evil Core is rather fun, and if it looks to you like a mixture of terminal velocity and descent, then you're right. Because it not only looks like it, but plays similar too, and it's definitely worth the time investment. All the signs in the sky, and those that I can read from the crystal ball and my discarded tea bags, seem to point to the future being rather dark, gloomy and dystopian, and an early rather than late future at that. Vigilance depicts just that, disappointingly devoid of anything good, not so distant future. Crime, violence and terrorism seem to be plaguing each and every of our waking days, and the world appears to be beyond saving. Enter Scion, as in Special Intelligence Operations Network, a group consisting of 8 operatives chosen based on their special skills, exceptional abilities, high intelligence and adaptability. Wow, that sounded like a pitch for 1980s action TV show. They are cream of the crop and chosen to counter all the terrors brewing in their nests, before they can get bigger and eventually grow out of control. Vigilance is a third and first-person action shooter in which you play as the Scion, picking an operative to control before every mission. There's 3 women and 5 men, and each of them has their own specialities and weak and strong sides. So, picking the right agent for the challenge ahead is very helpful. Most missions can be completed with any of them, so you will not lock yourself out of progression, but the right choice definitely makes a difference. If any of the characters fails during the mission, and I'd like to note here that I said that they would fail and not you controlling them, because you're you and you never would, then the next agent has to be chosen to carry the mission to its end. All of them are rather talkative, muttering unique tones and phrases constantly, and while these are fun for the first half an hour or so, their vocabulary is so limited that they're more likely than not to start getting on your nerves after. All the missions naturally have objectives that need to be completed, and they're often a series of smaller tasks that need to be done in a particular order, like finding a specific item or items, explosives perhaps, then getting to the location they need to be set in, and then leaving promptly, blowing the place up as you run away. That kind of stuff. While they're not very demanding and usually something you'd do anyway given the opportunity, it serves as a decent motivation for all the shooting that you'll do. The environments are rather interesting, beautifully rendered in 3D, with characters, yours and enemies serving a respectable polygon count in their models, at least for the time. That said, most of these surfaces will soon be covered in bullet holes as you go through them, annihilating anything and everything that comes your way. The best thing about Vigilance though is its action-packed gameplay that's supported by over 40 different weapons that you can find and regional damage system, meaning a single shot in the head is always way more effective than emptying half magazine worth of bullets in the enemy's heel. Vigilance is good fun, and while it's not all-time classic like Tomb Raider or Quake, it's definitely good enough to stand on its own legs. Uprising to Lead and Destroy, staying true to its title, allows you to do just that, so lead and destroy. And all that in its action-packed, real-time strategy and shooter mixture. Don't let it fool you though, despite looking more like a shooter, it doesn't skimp on the strategy. It depicts a conflict between humans that colonize the galaxy, living in peace and harmony no less, exactly like we know for a fact now observing geopolitical situation all around us, humans never would. And the generic Twitch alien race that appeared seemingly from nowhere and wants to conquer all the worlds capable of sustaining life. While you spend most of your gameplay time in a tank, you're not at this conflict alone, and you have to lead it actually. So you'll be setting up bases, calling buildings to be erected in them, and manufacture all manner of units. Soldiers, tanks, aircraft, and even nukes. You know, because we just love the nukes. If not to use them, then to parade them as some kind of a military demeasuring contest. You're also responsible for leading the units to victory. Bases can be built on few very specific points on the map only, known as the Citadel paths. They have to be claimed first and have enough space for the Citadel, which for all intents and purposes is just a main base building and few other additional buildings that you'll be able to call in for to be placed around it. These buildings are all used for manufacturing of units, hence strengthening your army and supporting your military efforts. Uprising 2 is an RTS, but one without any unnecessary resource gathering mechanics, laser focusing on explosive combat only. Now, as you go about annihilating alien scum, spreading freedom one laser beam shot at a time and capturing citadel paths, your enemy is not sleeping and doing the same. So, the battle is rather action-centric, constantly throwing dangers at you from all sides. Aliens send their own attack forces at your bases, just the way you do yours at them. Interestingly enough, you don't direct units into the battle same way you would in traditional RTSs like Red Alert or Warcraft, but have to teleport them to the locations where you'd like them to do their deadly deeds. The catch is that you don't point on the location on a map, but have to actually get there in your tank first, and mark the teleport point by hand, so to speak. So, whether you want a breather or not, to win, you're always going to have to be in the heat of the battle. Uprising 2 is pretty fun if you enjoy both RTSs and shooters, and an interesting take on a bit stale by 1998 genre. Delta Force is loosely based on the United States' Delta Force Special Operations military unit, and it's a tactical first-person shooter. And as such, it was banking on realism through and through, rather than going for more popular and widespread arcade shooting. It was the right call, it seems, as it was both critical and financial success, and it helped immensely in popularizing of the tactical FPS genre. Delta Force is composed out of 40 unique missions spread between 5 campaigns set in different theaters of war in Peru, Indonesia, Uzbekistan and Novaya Zemlya. While all the campaigns are available from when you start the game and can be played in any order, not all missions are, and you'll need to complete the earlier to gain access to the latter. The typical mission would see you starting in one of few random startup points, then complete all the objectives that you are given, and finally either end the mission then and there, or have to move to the extraction point. objectives can be quite varied and based on missions real Delta Force is known for tackling. So, elimination of all hostile presence in a particular region, assassination of high-profile targets, destruction of military equipment and rescuing/escorting of civilians or POWs to the extraction points. These are some of the based on real-life challenges that you'll be partaking in. Naturally, all weapons found in the game are based in reality too, and you can either use the default included loadouts or modify them to your heart's content, picking and choosing between all the available weapons before each mission. It's worth pointing out that unlike grand majority of shooters of the time, bullets are not calculated under the hood so to speak, but the real in-game objects traveling from point A to point B when shot, having their trajectory simulated realistically, accounting for drop, speed and time to reach the target, which may require leading your aim at the target that's far enough. It's seemingly a small thing, but makes for a much more engaging experience, and I'm sure most hardcore fans of the tactical shooters can swear by it. The enemy AI is great too. On higher difficulty that is, as on lower they look for you as if they left home without glasses and shoot as if they were holding the guns sideways, like they're sometimes held in cheap action movies. When set appropriately high, the AI is not only much better at locating you based on your movement and shots, but also more accurate and can even use more advanced tactics of covering fire or splitting into smaller groups and encircling you. I'm not great at tactical shooters, correction, I'm not great at shooters overall, and tactical ones especially, but I do enjoy getting lost in them from time to time, imagining that I'm really there on an important mission, ramboing the enemies one by one, trying to get to the captives in need of rescue, or to explode a fuel depot behind the enemy lines to slow their offensive. If you enjoyed those types of experiences too, and are not easily put off by late 90s graphics, Delta Force is definitely worth a look. Asgan the Dragon Slayer is an excellent title for the anime series straight from Japan, full of dragons that breathe fire, dames waiting to be saved, and questionable, tentacle-filled acts of interspecies loving. But it's also a Tomb Raider-like action-adventure fantasy-themed game with some very superficial role-playing elements. Your father has been killed, and I'm sorry. By dragons no less. While it's nothing out of ordinary in the medieval fantasy times and people have been eaten by all manner of dragons, wyverns, griffins or even spider pigs, your father is your father, or rather was one, and you playing as the titular Asgan swore to avenge his death. And since you've no idea which of the numerous dragons has done it, cause you're a little racist too, and all of them look the same to you, you head off to the mythical land of dragons to kill them all. As brave as it's stupid I must add, cause all you have starting off this John Wick-like quest is a sword, and dragons have all the dragony things you could imagine. So deadly claws, razor-sharp giant teeth, they breathe fire and have like at least 2-3 tons of weight advantage on you to boot too. But as the saying goes, if you're not gonna tell someone that what they're about to attempt is impossible, they will go ahead and make it possible. I'm not sure how it went exactly, but the sentiment stands. As you go on this seemingly impossible quest, you'll lay death and destruction to all the creatures that will stand in your way, using many different weapons that you'll find, and spells and exorcism too. Cause why the hell not? I mean, all good games require a dark prayer. You'll also dabble in some environmental puzzling, not unlike the one found in Tomb Raider. You'll clear series of dungeons and arenas too, leaving a trail of dead bodies behind. And these will be all different, as there's over 60 kinds of enemies. All unique in how they look and fight, but completely identical to one another in how they lie there on the floor lifeless after you've done with them. Asgan is an interesting take on the action-adventure, serves heaps of pretty good combat, some Daredevil-worthy even if unnecessary jumping sections, a little puzzling here and there, and quite a lot of fun, if you don't look for anything deeper than the aforementioned Tomb Raider. It should be noted though that Tomb Raider is obviously a much better game, there's no comparison really. Tiger's Bane is a helicopter-based action shooter. Despite being the arcade title at heart, however, it features some rather realistic elements to it too, like accurate modeling of weapons and their effects and simulation of inertia and wind impacting your craft's movement. As in most similar games, it's the near future, and terrorists are expanding their activities considerably, threatening the world peace. So you, once again as the only hero capable of stopping them, are asked to pick up the mantle of the savior and deal with them once and for all. You take a role of an air cavalry commander and along with up to 2 wingmen have to take on the baddies in over 80 different missions set in different locations. Some will take place in the cities, others on chains of islands, desert or even over dense forests to name a few. You'll be sent anywhere a hero is needed, and you'll do whatever hero needs doing, even if it's taking a break for a Coke and pizza. Do not question the hero. There's few copters you'll have access to, famous Apache and Comanche among them, and you'll tackle the enemy day and night, good or bad weather, until there's none of them left. Or till you get tired of it all and jump to another game. I'm not saying that Tiger's Bane is bad, quite the opposite in fact. I'm only implying that you just may want to take a breather after a long day of laying death and destruction at some point. Tiger's Bane is kinda like Jet Strike, but newer and offering higher fidelity graphics and sounds. Is it better though? Hard to say, neither of them is the best arcade game out there, not even close, but both are equally as decent and fun for a few missions every now and then. In the future, as the title stipulates that the game setting, Caps shoot first and ask questions later, provided that there's anybody left capable of answering them, that is. So, playing as a Cap in 2098's Los Angeles, you investigate various crimes by asking the questions everywhere, all around to anyone, one bullet or missile at the time, and coming up with no answers, but mayhem and destruction instead. Odd. Anyway, you're sitting in your X1 Alpha, a police robot capable of transforming into either fast and nimble hovering pursuit vehicle or slower but heavy armed mech, on the fly no less. And you can experience future Cap LAPD in one of the two modes, Crime War or Precinct Assault. First is your typical story mode, following your day-to-day bullet-spewing responsibilities, taking many different missions, from dealing with the rogue lunatics fortifying themselves in civilian buildings, all the way to taking care of a malfunctioning supercomputer and everything in between. And as you progress through this mode, you'll unlock new parts of the city and partake in new kinds of missions. Interestingly enough, this mode can be played in co-op too, and in a unique way at that, in which both players must survive for the mission to be successful. Then there's the Precinct Assault mode, which for all intents and purposes is a very early iteration of the MOBA genre, you know, like Dota or League of Legends. So MOBA-style gameplay, but without the MO, and only BA. It's played on enclosed arenas with bases of both opponents on far opposing ends and the objective of invading of enemies' HQ, all the while capturing outposts and automated turrets in between the bases and deploying defensive helicopters and flying fortresses superplanes to secure the captured areas. There's 5 of these MOBA-like maps, and while they're naturally much simpler than what we're used to today, they're an interesting experience nonetheless. Future Cap LAPD is a fun third-person top-down shooter, so if you like those, you'll no doubt appreciate the variety this one offers with its unique gameplay modes. Xenocracy is an action space combat simulation with some political strategy elements. Yep, you heard that right, political. Don't let it scare you though, as Xenocracy can be run in the arcade mode, which entirely omits the strategic layer and only keeps the arcade simulation missions. Anyway, in the far-off future, and this time I really mean it, it's not 2098 like in one of our earlier games today, it's 10,600 AD, or more accurately, 10,600 of the Common Era, whatever that may mean. And mankind has long been colonizing and settled in space. So far in our solar system mainly, but we're evenly spread between the Earth, Mars, Venus and Mercury. And all of the factions governing these planets are in direct, but not yet escalated into an all-out war with all the others, conflict. So, effectively, we're in the state of interplanetary Cold War. Which kinda fits, cause you know, vacuum of space is commonly considered to be cold. It's not the case, as since there's no particles in it, there's no temperature either, at least not measurable ones, so I think I'm off topic again, following one of my random trails of thought. I should get back on the track. What's worse is that the conflict is on the verge of breaking into a full-fledged, real war. One that would not only consume billions of lives, but also possibly threaten the existence of humanity. If there's conflict, there's a reason. Sometimes it's superficial, sometimes it's territorial, sometimes it's racial or based on prejudice. This time, it's the most common one in fiction. War for resources, namely reserves of so-called leukocyte that's found in the outer colonies. All that kinda reminds me of The Expanse, the sci-fi series, and Beltalowda, Belters being used by the bigger factions and not considered to be worthy equal rights. If you've not seen it, it's rather good and very realistic in terms of space travel and combat. Anyway, given the severity and seriousness of the situation, only the United Planet Nations, a peacekeeping organization not aligned with either of the powers, can stop skirmishes and raids between them and try to prevent the war. You play as a commander of one of the elite units of UPN. The game's divided into 2 chunks. First is the strategic layer with the solar system map, on which you get to observe the hotspots and conflicts emerging, and then decide where to send help to. Helping one of the powers naturally upsets the other, so it's best to divide your attention equally, not to turn from a peacekeeper into the igniting force between them. Each of the decisions that you'll make here comes with consequences, which then you clearly presented and learn the outcome of your choices. The second quote-unquote part of Xenocracy is a simulation shooter in which you participate in various skirmishes in space and over the planet. There are mainly either protection or destruction of mine complexes and/or convoys, but they're rather fun. There's also research, and it plays increasingly more important role in your campaign the further you get and the bigger challenges that you'll face. There is no reason to dance around the subject anymore. All the parts of Xenocracy are decent, but not great. Put together, however, they form something new and unique, which, while not groundbreaking perhaps, it's fun and worth experiencing. A mega powerful and dangerous nuclear device has been stolen by the Terrorists, and they threaten to use it against the planet of Esoteria and its colonies. I know that misspelling certain words has to be hella annoying, and I apologize for that, but the YouTube's algorithm is rather unforgiving and it tends to bury the videos with them spoken aloud. It's stupid on so many levels. I know that, but it is what it is, and I hope it's not too big of an issue for you. Anyway, as I said, the weapon has been stolen, the planet is on the brink of destruction, and there's only one person in the galaxy who can save it. And it's you, Techno-Assassin of the Future. Questionable name, but whatever, you are one and you will save us all. Esoteria Techno-Assassin of the Future is the third-person perspective sci-fi action shooter. It's not an all-out guns-blazing one though, and it requires you to think smart and utilize both stealth and sniping when and where possible, preferably everywhere and all the time. The story unfolds steadily and gets progressively more detailed as you go through the game, eventually touching on many subjects other than war. Stuff like moral issues of creating a biomechanical assassin, using him for killing only, and his humanitarian rights, or lack thereof. It's deeper than it had any right to be, and if not for anything else, then for that alone, Esoteria is worth experiencing. The character that you're playing as, Raven, is made out of glass and paper clips, and any real full frontal conflict with nearly always seriously outnumbering him enemies ends with him either dead or heavily injured. So, that aforementioned sniping and stealthy approach is a must. The levels are rather nicely looking, full 3D and appropriately so futuristic, but the sheer size of some of the stages may be more confusing than anything else, and you may find yourself wandering around them from time to time, straight up looking for where to go next. The enemies and Raven all look rather bad. There's no reason for a game from 1998 to use flat sprites instead of 3D objects for the characters, and they stick out like a sore thumb, or single curly fry in a bag of french fries. Difference is, you actually look forward to that fry when you find it. And sprites in a 3D world by 1998 were doing nothing more than breaking the illusion and taking you out of the experience. Still, however you wanna look at it, Esoteria is not a bad game. It's just better at its storytelling than gameplay. And that's something no dev ever really wants to hear. Grand Prix Legends is a 1967 Formula 1 Grand Prix season simulation by Papyrus. Yes, the Papyrus that I seem to be talking about all the time recently. The once masters of realistic simulations, today sadly non-existent anymore. Why make a game about 1967 in 1998, you may wonder? Well, the devs wanted to look back at the racing when it was the most action-packed and risky. In 1967, the trucks still had trees, houses and other roadside objects around their very narrow roads, which when passed by added a lot to the sensation of speed. What's more, they gave it their best, trying to simulate the cars from the era as close to real life as it was possible. And let me tell you, these cars were not the near self-driving beasts that we have today. They were notoriously difficult to operate at high speed and on sharp corners. What's more, the physics engine got a major overhaul, apparently to be the new benchmark for realism in racers. Turns out it had its ups and downs. Same could be said about the opposing driver's AI. It was excellent, but paired with no slider for the difficulty meant that you always drove against the best of the best that there were, which unless you've trained for weeks on end meant that you had a rather bad and frustrating time. Grand Prix Legends, while being an excellent title for simulation enthusiasts, failed commercially. And it's because, while it was universally praised by those who were into the classic F1, that subset of gamers was rather small. What's more, the game was developed in a way that made playing it considerably easier with a steering wheel, pedals and a stick, which is great, you know, I get that, but most players had keyboards and mice only. And racing on this was a little nightmare for those who had no wheel controller. This alone cut the already small group of potential players into even smaller pieces, trimming all these who couldn't enjoy it because playing competitively on a keyboard was very challenging. Steep learning curve, high entry point and unforgiving difficulty made Grand Prix Legends a disappointment. It had everything it needed to succeed, same as previous Papyrus's games did, and sadly failed to drive it home. Bad pun intended. I know of at least one of my viewers who was eagerly awaiting for me to talk about this game. Die by the Sword is a third-person perspective fantasy-themed action-adventure like no other. And I mean it. It was years ahead of its time and probably the most immersive combat game that you'd seen to date. What do I mean by that? Well, imagine the combat system that was in Daggerfall, but 10 times more advanced and actually working. Yeah, I know, incredible. It's not a mess, but a fully working and usable manual sword fighting mechanic, with different combinations of moves for slashes, stabs, jabs, parrying, all done via mouse and keyboard, utilizing many different mouse moves and numerous keys for controls. Sure, sounds terrible, but it only sounds like it's overly complicated. Because while you may not get it in a minute, 10, 15, half an hour tops, and you'll be running around slicing the enemies and performing near instantaneous parries to their attacks too. The system is complex, but it's not broken, unfriendly or unfair. All it asks you to do is give it little time to learn it and form muscle memory to all the attacks and guards. I oversimplified the attacks by using their names a minute ago, making them feel like they were particular pre-baked ones, but it's important that you realize that you actually have a full control of your swinging arm and can move it in any way you'd like. And what's even better about it is that the damage is not static number, but it's calculated using elaborate underlying system, keeping kind and direction of the attack that you make in mind, along with the size of the swing, so force that the weapon would have upon impact. It's something that was not replicated anywhere until the modern times games. We seem to get those now like every other day. Same goes for blocking. There's no button for it like in other games, and all you have to do is direct your weapon in a way that would put it in a position to intercept the enemy's weapon's attack. Naturally, shields operate similarly, though you can't control them as freely as with only one mouse. It has to be said that if for whatever the reason, all I just said makes you feel uneasy or seem off-putting, after all you wanna do is kill somebody, spill some blood, and not study for a degree in physics and thermodynamics, then there's the arcade control mode too, that literally simplifies it all to just a few buttons on a keyboard. But opting for that would be a mistake, because the freedom that the built-in combat system offers is not only unparalleled, but also allows for very precise attacks. And you know what that means, right? You don't? Well, let me explain, because it's pretty simple. It means that when you master it, you'll be chopping off limbs and decapitating bodies left and right, and will de facto become the Heretic of medieval fantasy times. A killing machine like no other. Story-wise, your beloved Maya, beautiful name I must add, was kidnapped by the kobolds. Now, this can't fly. Not on your watch, and not when it comes to your love. She's good, she's kind, unusually for the times that the game's set in, clean, and a passionate lover. So, you can't lose her. Having no other choice then, you pick up your sword and head off to cut her out straight from the belly of the beast, figuratively speaking. Other than the enemies, there are also environmental hazards in the game, but it's the combat that is the most prominent feature and one worth experiencing. So much so that the built-in multiplayer offering Arena and Tournament was a lot of fun too, with up to 4 of you going at it all at once. Even if you're not into the whole medieval slashing and hacking or don't care for action games at all, Die by the Sword is still worth checking out, just to sample the mechanics that it's built upon, because there was nothing like it in 1998 and for many years after either. Oh, and the graphics, sounds and music especially were rather good too. I forgot to mention that getting lost in everything else, so yeah, that. I think we've ended up 1998 on a high note. We didn't dip too much into the bad or the unknown, so I'll have some games left for the obscure series that will probably come in the future. And for now, I will start gearing up for 1999. What do you think of today's games though? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. Smash them if you have to, it helps more than you could ever know. Also, I would like to thank you and all my amazing Patreon and YouTube members for helping this channel keep going. And last but definitely not least, I would like to thank all the wonderful folks who record and upload playthroughs, let's plays and other retro-centric videos here on YouTube, because they help to preserve the games that would have otherwise been long forgotten. So thank you.